I said last night, it was a little bit difficult hearing some of that last night, but that's a technical issue that we've learned and we'll work through it. But this is about dialogue, and I just said to one of the gentlemen that are here that in human history, and I've written a lot about this, but in human history, war is the norm, is the normal state of existence, okay? Not peace. Peace is an aberration, sadly. That's human beings, right? And when I think about my lifetime, in my lifetime, since, frankly, I was a child, in the coming out of Europe, I spent some of my childhood in Germany many years ago. But coming out of that, at that time was the beginning of the Vietnam era. Well, my father was in World War II, and then comes out of World War II, and everything's rosy, and everybody is happy, and maybe not so much, some of the people in Europe, but the United States of America then went in and rebuilt Europe. The United States went in and rebuilt China. Okay? We rebuilt it. Now, I'll leave that to the side, but then all of a sudden, another war kicks in called the Korean War, right? Korean War goes on. My father went to Korea. Actually, he was moving my family at the time. I had 3 brothers and sisters at the time with my mother. They drove out to Fort Lewis, Washington State, the northwest corner. As soon as they got to Washington State, the Korean War broke out. So my father had to send my mother and 3 young kids back home to Rhode Island, which is where I'm from, up in the north here. And he went to Korea for 2.5 years. So he went into northern Japan. They went into the Busan perimeter, and then he fought from there for 2.5 years. And then my brother Billy, who's another older sibling, he then gets involved. Of course, a few years later, the Vietnam War starts. The French resistance in Vietnam, so on and so forth. And then we have the Vietnam War for, I don't know, it probably lasted 15 years, right? 15 years at least, from really the early days of the late 1950s into the early 1970s. So I could go on and on and on about warfare, but we got to figure this cycle out. And I'm not going to sit up here and tell you that I'm going to control human history. But I do think that in this day and age, with the ability to communicate, we have an extraordinary ability to communicate these days and to understand various cultures. Okay, we had 50 different countries represented last night, and we'll have over the course of the day the same thing. That's 50 different cultures, right? I mean, everybody's slightly different, but when you sit and you talk to somebody, it's like, yeah, we got to figure this out, right? I'm not about selling anything. What I'm about is building things, okay? And this is really, really important. And I know that, I'm one person with a great team of people that we do have. And we have a great, wonderful team, and you'll hear from some of them today, that are essentially on the same ticket, the same train, trying to figure out how to influence not just the United States of America and the government of the United States of America, but also trying to, do our part in this time of human history to say, how can we get out of this cycle of madness? Because it is very, very chaotic, very complex. Complexity is another norm in human life, in human history. So, I could go on and on here, but I will get up and talk in a little bit. But I want people to understand a couple of things for today. We are live streaming this. Last night with the stream that we did just from downstairs, I had some great feedback from people that I know that were watching that I asked to watch. I asked them, hey, watch from afar. We probably had about 250,000 people that were watching last night. Over the course of today, we will have probably at least that number, maybe more, because people will pop in on the live stream. That's what you're seeing behind me here, right? I think, yeah, so I'm up there. That's what they're seeing, and that's what they're hearing very clearly, because this mic is tied into a feed, because this facility allows it, and we are doing that. So I know that those nations that are going to be speaking today, you know, like me, I'm not speaking for President Trump. You know, I speak for myself, but I speak for a lot of Americans. I definitely speak for a lot of Americans. And if there's one thing that I have learned in life, especially with the experiences that I've had, you know, operating around the world, I've learned a lot about the different cultures, and I've studied the cultures of the world. That's my thing. And I have deep respect, but I will also challenge those to operate in a world where cultures have to mix and blend, right? And we don't want to be overly antagonistic to each other. What we really want to do is kind of figure it out, right? I mean, God, I could spend all day talking to you about the history of the United States entry into World War II alone. You know, there's a great book called The Day of Infamy. And that's, you know, part of it is we, the United States of America, and this is where I'm definitely, you know, I'm speaking for myself, we have to take responsibility for some of the mistakes that we have made, right? That we have made. And there are many. And so I think if we are able to understand that and own up to it, but it doesn't, for some of you and some of the folks that I know that we've spoken to, it's difficult in some cultures to take responsibility. It's actually difficult in our culture to take responsibility. You know, that's what your mother teaches you, right? You do something wrong at home, your mother or your father maybe teaches you, take responsibility for whatever mistakes you made, right? That's a teaching, that's a lesson for children, and we do it for a reason, and we need to be able to do it as nations. Okay, we need to be able to understand what are the responsibilities that we have as a great power in this world, and again understanding the cycles of history that we are experiencing. So, you know, the main point there is that we are going to be we are live streaming this, and there's a lot of people that are interested in the things that are going on. And so, like I said, over the course of the day, people will pop in and pop out about what is happening. So, so with that, let me turn it over to you, Boone, and we'll get on with this. Okay.
Thank you, General Flynn. Good morning, everybody. I'm Boone Cutler. I'll be one of the moderators for today. Welcome to the importance of strategic partnerships. That's what we're here about today, about building strategic partnerships, a global security and diplomacy conference. The first person up today, I'd like to introduce the president of the Gold Institute for International Strategy, Ellie M. Gold. He is a seasoned foreign policy strategist, bridging practical political leadership, scholarly analysis, and bipartisan diplomacy. As president of the Gold Institute, he unites global leaders and policy-making bodies to craft strategic solutions on defense, alliances, and democratic resilience. Ellie.
Thank you for joining us today. You know, this is an opportunity for the Gold Institute to really show and what we do within the organization. But General Flynn was very clear both this morning. I'll talk a little bit more, as well as last night, as he recently came on. This is a great opportunity for me actually to formally welcome General Flynn as the chairman of the Institute. We have been working together for the past probably about a decade now, maybe a little bit longer, on consequential issues and addressing them. We created this institute because it's a little bit unique, and I wanted to really articulate what makes the Gold Institute unique. What's our secret sauce? We realized that there's a lack of actionable thought coming out of Washington. And what we decided to do was we created a think tank that has no scholars. It's really a think and do tank. And all of our what I'll call scholars, are really practitioners, people who have been there in the field. And by being in the field, whether you're a former national security advisor to a president, whether you're former members of Congress, sitting members of parliament, and the military intelligence and so on, by having boots on the ground, having been in the field, you have a certain perspective that you, in order to create a policy that you cannot get just by sitting in an office studying and so on. Not to suggest that that's not a good thing either. So we did that. But as we have a conference today, this important security and diplomacy conference, we talk about partnerships. Something also that's very important to understand is as General Flynn had referenced, the cultural dynamics, the globe, and our partners and allies. And we have many partners and allies joining us today, and in fact speaking. But what's important for us to understand is as we create this foreign policy, and we create policy and address consequential issues, as Adam Lovinger did, and we'll be speaking later about in his national security strategy, it's important that we understand who our partners are. And for that reason, we have, within the Institute, we have 10 countries represented, from Europe, the Middle East, from the Pacific, and it's growing. So this is really what makes the Institute unique, and why having a conversation about strategic partnerships is so important. I don't need to introduce General Flynn again because we all know General Flynn. But I think as we move into the section about national security and national security strategy that Adam Lovinger is going to discuss in just a few minutes, I wanted to call General Flynn back to introduce this discussion about the national security strategy. But thank you for joining us.
Okay, you get enough of me today. So on the chairs, we dropped one of these. Okay, and I said this last night, but the last one that was crafted was 2017, and they're supposed to do these every so often. What I want to do is just describe to you because Adam Lovinger is going to come up and he's going to go in a little bit more detail than the comments and remarks that he made last night. Yeah, just come on quietly, grab your seat. Thank you and welcome. What I want to describe to you is the process for this, okay? The process, because I think for you to understand the process that we go through here in the United States of America is a very important, and it's a very detailed, disciplined process in order for us to have a vision of where we need to be in the future and the kinds of problems that we are facing. So, we mentioned some countries in here, some we don't. And it's not a matter of, we're not putting in there because we don't care. This is a very high level, and it's supposed to be document that's supposed to provide kind of the problem set that the United States of America is facing, and then some recommendations. It's not to use a euphemism, it's not the end all be all, it's not the final answer, it's just a guide, okay? And that's really, even if it was done by the National Security Council or the President of the United States, it would still just be a guide because things happen. The world is dynamic, and trade deals are cut and trade deals are, and wars start and wars end. So this is a guide to kind of give us a big lane, if you will. A big road, a big pathway that we can follow. But once this is created, then the other elements of our government then take the guidance in here and they create their strategies. So for the Defense Department, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Education, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of whatever, right? Even what we have are like agencies and activities and commissions, as well as departments. Those are other components of the U.S. government. Every single one of those that are either independent or if they're at the department level, they're supposed to create and craft their policy and their vision for what the President of the United States has crafted and has directed. So each subordinate organization does that. So they take a document like this, and then they'll create their own. And I know that the Department of Defense right now, as an example, I know that they're in the process of actually trying to craft a defense strategy without one of these, because the White House hasn't put one out yet. And because what leaders typically do in the executive branch of our government, leaders will typically go, look, without guidance, we're going to move in this direction. So in this case, Secretary Hegseth, right? He's saying, okay, I've talked to the president. This is what the president wants. This is what the president campaigned on, right? This is what the American people voted for him on. So we're going to move, and when he gives us more guidance, I'll feed you guys. So in the meantime, good leaders, great leaders, will move out, okay? So your systems, and I know I've studied enough of the different foreign partners that we have to know that you don't necessarily have this very detailed process. You do come up with ideas from your different leaders, but this is a really effective process. And even if you don't, even if your leader and for the rest of the world comes up with some kind of idea about how that leader wants to run your country, that's fine. That's fine. If and everybody else around him says this is what you're going to do, okay? That's fine. But you should have some vision for your future, okay? So in our case, what we did is we sat around about a month and a half ago, roughly, and we said, let's do this. Let's have this, and let's do something like this. So again, this is kind of some ideas that we have bounced back and forth and decided to craft something. And I want your feedback. I want you to look at it. I love your feedback, actually, over time. But that's the process that we go through to create, our government goes through to create something like this. And I will tell you, because, all of the ones that were taken last night, which was great, and we have a bunch more, I will, whether they like it or not, I will deliver one of these to very senior members in our executive branch. I will ensure that, all members of Congress and the House and the Senate get a copy, whether they throw it into the circular file, which is the trash, or not, that's up to them, but they will at least get it. I'm not going to let them get away with saying, because somebody eventually is going to go, did you see what this guy Flynn was doing? And that's what I want them to know, okay? Because we have to have a vision for the future. Now, some of this stuff you may look at it as a nation, for those that are listening, because we're live streaming right now, for those nations that are paying attention, there may be some things in here that make you, squirm in your seat, okay? And if that makes you squirm in your seat about the direction that the United States is going, because, I've described the U.S. like this, and this is a big general picture, in general. If you had one bank in the world, just one bank, right? One financial institution in the world, a third of the wealth in that bank, a third, belongs to the United States of America. So that's wealth in terms of hard capital and natural resources. And natural resources is also human capital. So about a third. The next third goes to the next sort of top 10 economies and countries in the world. The next third of that wealth. And those 10 don't work together, right? The next third, so the final third of that wealth, goes to the rest of the world. Okay, goes to the rest of the world, and today we have, 184 countries, maybe, give or take, around the world. That's the power of the United States of America, and if we act, the U.S., again, I'm speaking for myself, but if we act in a benevolent way where we are trying to work together to build things and to build coalitions and to build partnerships, to build friendships, to create opportunity, particularly wealth. I was talking to one of my friends from North Africa here this morning, and and it's like there's so much opportunity, but you got to have a vision. You got to have a direction. In here, and Adam's going to talk a little bit about it, and I'll shut up here in a second. In here, we actually take a very hard look internally, because we got internal problems. It's as public as you can get, right? It's as public right now as you can get, and I love it. I love it because that public-facing way that we are describing to the world the problems that we have internally, that's how we do it here in the United States, right? Because it's the people that run this country. All these, the elites, the deep state, the political establishment that swirls around Washington, D.C., they are about to get a taste of the American people. Trust me. They already did twice in 2 elections, electing the guy that's sitting in the White House, which is that direction, right? And it's Donald Trump. He's like the most imperfect politician you're ever going to meet. And he's a fascinating guy. But he's like stuck himself into this mess as much. Actually, he probably really wanted to do it for the United States of America initially. But now and I know this, as he's seen things, certainly his first administration, now this is about humanity. This is about humanity. I mentioned this briefly last night about globalism versus sovereignty, right? So all these nations that are represented here, you want your sovereignty. You want your culture. You love your country, right? Just like I do. I want my sovereignty. I want my country. I love my country. But we got to figure out how to work together because it is a vastly much more multipolar world. Okay? It's not this East versus West anymore. That changed 25 years ago. And 35, right? At the end of the Cold War. At another war. So, anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Adam, who I have, Ellie, who's the president. Adam, I mentioned briefly about Adam last night and how he and I connected over time. And he's going through his own personal pain of facing like what I faced, right? But the 3 of us up here that are sort of represent, the leadership as well as others that you're going to meet today, and some of our fellows that are here, we're not giving up. We're not giving up, and it takes a lot to stand in that fire that we are still going through. But trust me, it's like I said to people, if you're gonna have a coup, you better kill the king. Right? They tried. So anyway, okay. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Adam. Thank you very much for everything you've done. Thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you, General Flynn and Ellie. It's an honor and privilege to be your colleague. And I know that everyone in this room is very busy. You have lots of important things on your plates. And it is my job, our job here, to make your time here very worthwhile. And I think it is a wise investment because what we're going to be talking about today is actually very important, not just for the United States, but also for our allies and partners. We crafted this national security strategy, which each of you should have a copy of in your seat, because we live in really unprecedented times. And I know that many people say that, and it's almost a cliche, just to get sort of an audience's attention. And then they go into something which is actually not very remarkable, and they ask themselves, why did that speaker say we live in unprecedented times, to get my attention, get me excited, only to leave me deflated? I personally have too much respect for your time and too much respect for your intelligence to do that sort of bait and switch trick. And so I'll make my case for why we live in unprecedented times. There's actually really 3 reasons I'd like to address. The first one is the seriousness of our times. The Director of National Intelligence recently announced that the Trump administration has conclusive evidence, and I quote, of a treasonous conspiracy by officials at the highest levels of the Obama White House to subvert the will of the American people and try to usurp the president from fulfilling his mandate. The DNI went on. It's worse than even politicization of intelligence. It was manufactured intelligence that sought to achieve President Obama and his team's objectives, which was undermining the duly elected President of the United States and subverting the will of the American people. Now, as we speak here, the DNI is making criminal referrals to the U.S. Department of Justice, and what the DOJ does with that will remain to be seen. But I think it's important to dwell a little bit on this charge of treason, treasonous conspiracy, because it's a very serious charge. It's the only crime that is enumerated in the U.S. Constitution, only one, and it's treason. And treason means the willful act by citizens of a country to levy war against the government, or provide aid and comfort to our enemies. So both of these dual aspects of treason relate to hurting America and helping our enemies. It's a very serious charge. The national security strategy which you have before you lays out precisely this problem and why it exists. So I'm not going to get into the details of it. We can read that at your leisure on your own. The second unusual aspect of our present era is just how unique this charge of treason is. In looking back at U.S. history, there are only 2 times in U.S. history that have even come close to this level of severity. One was in 1807 when Vice President Aaron Burr was tried for treason for plotting to urge some states to leave the Union. And another, actually better known time, was when a less senior official, but still a general, Benedict Arnold, a military officer, crossed the lines to join the British during the Revolutionary War. But this was a mere vice president and a mere general. What we're talking about today is the President of the United States, a sitting President of the United States. His vice president, Hillary Clinton, the Democratic candidate for presidency, that president's spy chiefs, and many others. This is not only a level of seniority, which is much higher, but it is a conspiracy because it includes many very senior actors. So this is unusual. The third aspect of our moment, which I think is unprecedented, and I'm very happy that so many, and we'll get into the reasons why. What you're going to be seeing is a rare look beneath the surface of the swamp. You are going to be seeing something that only happens when there's a shock to the conscience. And a shock to the conscience, I'm a lawyer by background, that's a legal term, to shock the conscience. We are so distracted by our cell phones and the quotidian noise of our daily routines that so rarely do we have a moment like now that shocks the conscience, causes us to stand back and to peer deep, deep inside what possibly created the conditions for this treasonous conspiracy, the alleged treasonous conspiracy. It does not come out of a vacuum. It comes from somewhere. And we are going to be looking at that. This moment is going to shine a light on the slow-moving systemic rot and corruption that created the conditions for this egregious crime. That's what we are going to be seeing. Now, is that the infiltration of the United States by our enemies is rather extensive. This is being done to, frankly, do the bidding of our adversaries. and we lay out the reason why that is the case in our national security strategy. But I'll give you a taste of it here. And that is that for more than a century, Americans' adversaries have been trying to discover what is America's Achilles heel. America is a formidable nation. General Flynn was talking about how we are a third of global power and wealth and influence. And we're a confusing nation because we're so chaotic in many respects. That is, in some respects, the design of our republic is to be that way, because that's the self-correcting mechanisms of our constitutional order and practice. So our enemies have been trying to discover our Achilles heel, and in the process, they've encountered very sharp teeth, but they've also encountered what our soft underbelly is. Our sharp teeth, of course, were probably on greatest display during the Second World War, when Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan took us on, and we firebombed their cities and strategically bombed them, dropped nuclear weapons. That was a very harsh lesson not to take America on head-on. That's a mistake that our enemies have learned the hard way a few times in our history. Regarding America's soft underbelly, to our enemies' pleasant surprise, it's actually easier and frankly a lot cheaper to achieve strategic victory over America by taking an indirect approach. And that is, they have realized that America is unusually open. Our institutions, our government, our borders are very open to outside influence and, of course, subversion. A friend of mine, and a brilliant man, J. Michael Waller, wrote a book called Big Intel. I encourage you to read it. It spells out this history of how America's adversaries have infiltrated America from within. He traces it back to 1917 when a young Leon Trotsky arrived in New York City to spread revolutionary socialism and to pack crowds in Brooklyn and Manhattan. So for over 100 years, America's authoritarian adversaries have waged war to infiltrate us, either directly, but usually with fellow travelers, so that means Americans who do their bidding for them, and to undermine us from within. And once inside, they're delighted about how easy it is to buy influence. Every institution of strategic significance in the United States they discovered was corruptible. They've made great headway. And indeed, this is, if this shocks you, you haven't been paying attention. This theme of adversary corruption of American institutions is so prevalent that it's really not even newsworthy anymore. Nothing is shocking because the level of foreign subversion is so extreme. I'll just give you a few examples just from the past couple of weeks. Hamas and the Islamic Republic of Iran openly brag for many months, years now, that they have agents on all of our college campuses, and really nobody seems to care. Most of these Ivy League protests are funded and by foreign adversaries. I hope none of you have children going to these schools who are actually being the tools of America's enemies. There's a less polite term. It's useful idiots. Hopefully you're not plagued by that problem. My children are not quite yet. Even I'd say more shocking, as we've learned recently, that engineers in China have been maintaining the Pentagon's computers. Think about that. This is much more serious than is reported in the public, and that will come out over time. Another recent headline: 2 Chinese nationals arrested for spying on U.S. Navy personnel and bases. And the Department of Justice has recently charged Chinese nationals with smuggling potential agroterrorism fungus into the U.S. for their work at the University of Michigan laboratory. This was last month. One of those individuals was double dipping. She was getting paid by the People's Liberation Army and the U.S. government to wage agroterrorism against the United States. There you go, exactly, as General Flynn said. Yeah, very clever. And then, of course, there's the Russian role in Russiagate. This has not gotten as much attention as it should, but what we know from the Department of Justice Inspector General is that in the Steele dossier, Hillary's deep sources were Russian intelligence officers. They're the ones, after you go through all the cutouts, it goes back to Russia. And this is a disinformation coup that Russia has scored on the United States and is responsible, I believe, for this treasonous conspiracy charge, or at least it should be. And this is pervasive. There's an old saying that nothing succeeds like success. In 2022, the Washington Post summarized a U.S. intelligence assessment that found that after Putin had helped Obama win re-election to the White House, this was in 2012, a secret long-term strategy was hatched in the bowels of the Kremlin. Between 2014 and 2022, Moscow spent $300 million on operations that compromised foreign political parties and candidates for political office, and it, quote, planned to spend hundreds of millions more as part of a covert campaign to weaken democratic systems and promote global political forces that align with Kremlin interests, end quote. Our adversaries know what works, and this is their sharp tip of the spear. One reason our adversaries have done this is, of course, to steer U.S. foreign policy in a direction that hurts America but helps them. This is mostly Section 2 of our national security strategy on your seats. They do that, first of all, to take over America's most strategically significant institutions, to do their bidding for them. Their strategy was described succinctly by Whittaker Chambers in the 1950s, who observed that the power to influence policy has always been the ultimate purpose of the Communist Party's infiltration of America. It was much more dangerous and, as events have proved, much more difficult to detect than espionage, which beside it is trivial, though the two go hand in hand. Chambers wrote that in 1952 in his book Witness. But since that time, our authoritarian adversaries' strategies, tactics, techniques, and procedures have become much, much more sophisticated. The Director of National Intelligence treasonous conspiracy charge is emblematic of how a significant percentage of America's most senior leaders, including government and military officials, have adopted Beijing's and Moscow's strategic objectives for America as their own. Now, this level of convergence is unique because during the Cold War, it was mostly on the political left that you had advocates for our enemy's strategic objectives. Now we are witnessing something called the horseshoe theory in practice, and that is we have the woke left and we have the woke right mouthing the strategic objectives of America's enemies as their own and for America. What is my evidence for this? Well, it's in plain sight. I'll give you 3 examples. The first is this notion that America must pursue a balance of power in the world. A balance of power. Now think about that for a while. Balance of power sounds nice. It sounds equitable. It sounds balanced. It sounds harmless. But it's absurd. It's an absurd idea. And it's so absurd that it's included in our enemy's strategic documents as their objectives. 2 years after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1993, the Kremlin produced the foreign policy concept of the Russian Federation, which sought as its strategic objective a balance of influence in the world. That's their terms. And how was that done? After the collapse of the Soviet Union, America was an unrivaled superpower. Russia, our other adversaries, were significantly weaker. A balance of power in practice would mean America ceding its power to our enemies to create balance. Of course, that's what our enemies want. But there are so many U.S. officials who talk about the need for a balance of power in the world, who want to cede American primacy, cede American preeminence, cede U.S. military overmatch to our adversaries to create balance. All you have to do is pay attention and you'll hear it time and again. A second adversary strategic objective that is mouthed by many senior U.S. officials is the need for a multipolar world. A multipolar world is a variation of balance of power, but instead of the bipolar world of the Cold War or the unipolar world where the United States is the sole superpower, they seek to spread the power. Multipolar, that sounds nice. That's like a UN sort of, let's come together and hold hands version of the world that never works in practice. This was laid out in the 2000 national security concept of the Russian Federation, signed by Vladimir Putin. And it's such an attractive view of the world, a rearrangement of power in the world, that it continues to this day. And like I said, nothing succeeds like success. So many American senior officials parrot these adversary objectives. A classified annex to the April 11, 2023 Russian foreign policy concept of the Russian Federation calls, yet again, for the West to realize that there is a lack of any benefit from a future confrontational policy and hegemonistic ambitions, and that the U.S. should accept the complicated realities of a multipolar world. Again and again and again. This has been going on for a long time. So it's this remarkable confluence of U.S. senior officials and our adversaries wanting the same thing. And of course, this is not relegated to the government itself. Many of our institutions pursue a diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. The equity part is balance of power, it's multipolar, it's part and parcel of the same cultural Marxist sort of woke agenda that, frankly, I would say, Putin and Xi Jinping and the mullahs in Iran, the ones that are left, are probably, they sort of laugh at us on a daily basis that we accept this stuff and take it as our own. And finally, there is this policy prescription that you increasingly hear about isolationism. Isolationism. Now, this is done in very bad faith. There are many people today in the United States, in the government, and also throughout our institutions, who are sort of just jumping into this conclusion that America must be isolationist. And the reason why this is bad faith is this. Like, if indeed there was some real strategic purpose for isolationism, okay, let's hear it. But as we talked about last night, as General Flynn mentioned, as I spoke in my comments, America's strategy capacity, we no longer produce the precursors for our national security strategy called net assessments. This assessment would permit us to look at where is America relative to our adversaries, and do we really have no choice but isolationism? Do we need to pull back? Do we need to balance power? Do we need to have this multipolar world? The analysis has not been done. So if you don't do the analysis and you immediately say we must surrender, which so many senior American officials are saying these days, or senior luminaries are saying, that shows bad faith to me. That, to me, shows just how corrupted, whether they're useful idiots or tools of our adversaries, I don't know. But it's bad faith. And we need to call them out on it. A classified addendum to the Russian foreign policy concept called for precisely this: for Russia to disrupt the domestic politics of the United States and European countries through propaganda campaigns supporting isolationist policies. So think about that for a while when you hear these talking heads talk about the need for America to be isolationist and cede our preeminence or overmatch or primacy. This goes on, and it's not relegated to the United States. It's relegated to many other countries as well. I am personally, heartened to see, however, that even though I don't think President Trump has all the best advisors, he himself recognizes the need for American preeminence, American primacy, and overmatch. I don't think this balance of power, multipolar world, or isolationist tendency has infected him, and thank God, because that would be a problem. I think he's wiser than that. Instead, he's adopted a policy of deterrence through peace through strength, which was a very sharp break from the Obama and Biden administrations, which genuinely did adopt the strategic objectives of Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran for their own. So we've been talking about treasonous conspiracy and of U.S. officials, but there's really something deeper going on, and I'm not going to talk about it too much because it is in the national security strategy. But the reason, but the purpose, the issue is, why are our enemies doing this? Why are our adversaries doing this? And frankly, it's because they're scared. They're scared because they know they're failing. The Russians know they're failing. The Chinese know they're failing. I'm not one of these people to say that, to downplay the threat they pose to the United States. They do pose a very severe threat to the United States, in part because they're failing. But they know that they're rotten from within, and that their only hope is they can't reform, because they know that. They don't have the flexibility for that. Their only hope is to tear America down. And the reason why they want to do that is not for external purposes, but for internal purposes. Their greatest fear are their own people. They don't fear the United States. They don't fear other countries. They fear their own people. And they fear their own people because their people look to America as a beacon of hope. They see our imperfect republic as what they want. They want the freedoms that we in this room have to criticize our government. They want this more than anything, and they're willing to die for it. Those people are the greatest threat to our authoritarian adversaries' regimes. The data is obvious. You look through Iranian history, it's these street movements that go into the public square, that when there's like sort of an uprising, this overthrows Iranian governments. It's also the reason why in the People's Republic of China, that the domestic security services inside China are 3 times larger than the People's Liberation Army. The budget is bigger, even though the Chinese are building an indigenous aircraft carrier and lots of other weapons. Beijing is so afraid of their own people, and that is why they're trying to make America more authoritarian, more like them, so their people will have no hope. And we spell this out with more detail inside our national security strategy. These brutal regimes, they fear their own people than the U.S. or the Western country, because the freedoms the U.S. has are a beacon of hope. They know that their only chance of long-term survival is to distinguish that hope. And to do that, they need Americans to lose faith in our government, in our most prominent institutions. Their theory of victory is that once we lose faith in our institutions, we will lose faith in democracy itself and embrace authoritarianism. Now, I painted a bleak picture of America today, but I actually think it's a very hopeful picture. And the reason why, maybe it has to do with my legal training and as a constitutional lawyer. I had a wonderful experience some years ago to take a walk along the path in Princeton University campus with the late, great Professor Bernard Lewis, who explained to me that America's authoritarian adversaries have what he calls exoskeletons, whereas America, we have endoskeletons. And what he means by that, an exoskeleton is like, insects. They have their skeleton on the outside, but they're soft on the inside. So they have this brittle exterior, it's hard, but once you break through, it's soft, and in the case of our adversaries, rotten from within. We discovered that rot. The Soviet Union collapsed in '91. We're discovering that with Iran today. By the contrast, America is the opposite. We have this soft exterior, and you can poke and get into us, but once inside America, you hit a hard endoskeleton. And this is really perplexing for our adversaries. And what that endoskeleton is our constitutional order. It's a very flexible system. When it's working in practice, checks and balances. It's devoted not to upholding an individual's power, but upholding the rule of law. This was no accident. Our endoskeleton was in place by design. At our founding, John Jay warned a young America, that our openness to new immigrants and foreigners, as well as trusting national character. This was a great reason for our success. It reduced commercial transaction costs in ways that are unimaginable to other parts of the world. It also exposed America to great threats. Now, this endoskeleton has made America almost like magically creative, innovative, and powerful. We're the most prosperous civilization the world's ever known. And just when our enemies think they got us, we bankrupt them, or we overtake them by changing the rules of the game. A wise man who's actually sitting in the front row here, General Flynn, once told me when I was joining him to work at the NSC, Adam, we want to make sure that we have the greatest number of options at the very last minute. That was his writ to me. And that's what America has. Our constitutional order is remarkably flexible. It's regenerative. And frankly, one reason why I'm hopeful, despite all of this doom and gloom I've been talking about, is because when our enemies do attack us, when we have treasonous conspiracies afoot, the constitutional ordered process of the rule of law to sort that out, to expose it, as we're doing here, with our allies and partners, seated here today, is a regenerative process, and it's our opportunity now to demonstrate just how resilient we are. I will end my talks by talking briefly about part 3 of our national security strategy, which is about allies and partners, and this is where you come in. The problems I've been discussing that take place in America are maybe more extreme than anywhere in the world, but they're not relegated to us alone. A dear friend of mine, who was also the commander of British forces in Afghanistan, Richard Kemp, recently just wrote an article titled, "Putin's Spies Have Infiltrated Every Section of British Society." So this is a pervasive problem. This presents us an opportunity, and it's an offer that we are extending to you seated in this room, those listening, our allies and partners in the United States, to work with us together. This plague is infecting all of us, and but it presents us an opportunity to address this common threat together. I'll conclude by stating that next year is America's semi-quincentennial. As we argue in the national security strategy, we've succeeded this long because 250 years ago, our framers bequeathed to us a practical, wise, and elegant constitutional order. Respect for and adherence to the U.S. Constitution has kept Americans freer for longer than any other civilization in history. Something similar was said about the Roman Republic, but that was before the erosion of its republican principles and rule of law gave way to the law of the jungle. Hopelessly corrupt, weak, and despotic Rome, by then a rump of a once great power, was overrun by barbarian hordes, as American Ivy League campuses are today, and Rome collapsed. But what put the final nail in the coffin was when Rome's unprincipled leaders normalized what we see today, the commission of treasonous conspiracy. Writing over 2,000 years ago, Marcus Tullius Cicero explained why. A nation can survive its fools and even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within. An enemy at the gates is less formidable, for he is known and carries his banner openly. But the traitor moves amongst those within the gate freely, his sly whispers rustling through all the alleys, heard in the very halls of government itself. We know what our enemies are trying to do. They're trying to do the same thing to you as well. Please join us in rooting out this rot and ending this evil and perpetuating all that is dear and important to us for future generations. Thank you very much.
are also sort of aligned, and that alignment has millions and millions of adherents or supporters, or I call them digital soldiers, right? That are ready to stand up for this constitutional order that we created, that people in this country created, fought for, and sacrificed. What we have to maintain is we got to maintain our egos, right? When we enter the room to have a conversation, we got to check our egos at the door. Right? Everybody's got an ego, so we get it from the different levels. And the other thing that we have to maintain is we have to maintain a benevolence, right? Because there are times in the military, I can tell you, because I have been a benevolent dictator in the military at times when I needed to be, because it was a mission to accomplish, and it's like, what? You're going to do this. That's on the battlefield. You need that sometimes, right? For direction, but it doesn't mean that I don't love you, right? The audiences in the room here that we had here last night, and I know that are paying very close attention. This is not about creating more enemies. This is about letting those that are trying to disrupt, frankly, the world order. Right? And I'm not a big fan of globalism. In fact, I'm so anti-globalist. But we have to have, in this chaotic, complex world that we are in, we've got to have some means to continue to communicate with each other, and also to inspire and build new leaders around the world. All of your different presidents and prime ministers and kings that are out there, they see themselves as leaders. They want to act as leaders in their country. They want to be seen on the world stage as leaders, around the world. And you look and you scratch beneath that beautiful analogy that Adam just used about exoskeletons and endoskeletons. You scratch beneath that surface, and your people don't have bread to eat. We have some of those problems right here in this country, in parts of our country. It's a big country. Some of that homelessness, right? So, when we scratch beneath the surface, for us, we are going to try to fix it. And we fix it. I use this phrase, Ian knows this in the back. I use this phrase, local action has a national impact. The phrase means a lot to me. That means that I served in the military, so I know what service is. But when I talk to citizens of our country, I say, how do you serve? Right? How are you serving? I want every citizen in our country to feel a responsibility to serve at some level. Serve this country, right? Service might be doing nothing more than praying, but serve it. Serve this country. And that's my bigger message to some of you who will listen, to figure out how do you get your populations, how do you get the people in your country to not, like when I watch a lot of this, when you have an election, you have a national election in your country. I watch your national elections all the time, because that's my thing. And I'm looking to see, how is your election system? So you say, yeah, this particular president, he's got 98% of the vote. That's impossible. It's impossible. Nobody is that well liked, right? But it happens. So how is it that we need to change from being an exoskeleton to being an endoskeleton? Where, I want this country to be, because we still are. The United States of America is the most giving nation on the planet still. Most people don't know that we give certain levels of funds, humanitarian aid, to places like North Korea. And we've been doing it for years, decades. Okay, decades. We think North Korea's, Kim Jong-un, right? And then his legacy, and how they behave. But we still give them aid. The United States of America still gives aid. It's amazing. What we are still capable of doing as a nation. That's kind of what we want to, that's sort of my big message is when you turn around and you look at your internal skeleton, you want to be a leader. You want to be a regional leader. You want to be a continental leader in I'm going to turn it back over to you guys, and I know you're going to introduce somebody. We are live streaming, so you know that. It's a huge audience. I'm going to go actually back and do right in the back here and do an interview with another probably 2 million people. So we are open kimono here for the Asian population, right? We're open. And you know, there will be times when we will be able to ask questions and stuff like that. Maybe during some of these things. So, you know, engage us and let us know how you begin to see things. And this is today, but as we go in time, we'll have more engagement. Okay, so Adam, absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Pleasure, privilege, honor to introduce a very dear friend of mine, a valued, very valued member of the Golden Institute, Congressman Trent Franks, a former U.S. representative from Arizona who served 7 terms in Congress. He is currently chairman of Liberty Petroleum Corporation and a distinguished fellow at the Golden Institute for International Strategy. Congressman Franks is known for his work on national security, energy policy, and constitutional issues. He chaired and co-chaired several congressional caucuses. Well, it is certainly a precious honor for me to be here with all of you, General. I guess he's already gone back. He's already doing the job. Thank you, Ellie, for all that you put these things together. Wouldn't any of us be here without you. And Adam, you're kind of the brain trust of the outfit. I'm glad you're here. And there's so many friends I have out there. I love you all. I only want to mention one because he had either difficulty or the honor, whatever you might want to call it, of being a fellow member of Congress. That's Joe Barker, Texas. Great guy. Respect. You know, I'm a little embarrassed because just about everything that I was going to say to you this morning has already been said by much more eloquent people. And, you know, they say that there's nothing more encouraging than to hear your own convictions fall from another's lips. And I've certainly heard that this morning. You know, especially the whole idea that, you know, it's the water on the inside of the ship that sinks and waves. And as we talk about partnerships, you know, all of us know that each of us need friends. And partnerships are vital in America, capitalist America. We have learned that we have to let each person do what they are very good at. And that together we can work together and be very productive. We compete with each other. Competition is sort of the foundational premise of our economy. Many people say, I would suggest to you that there might be even a more important one, and that would be related to the legal construct that we have, in that we pledge mutually to keep our promises to each other. We have contracts and agreements, and under a certain rubric of legal framework, we enforce those for the rest of us. So everyone is kind of on an even playing field. And without that, I have to tell you, the competition would be chaos more than it would be competition. And finally, we recognize that without a secure environment, without national security, there can be no prosperity, there can be no real economic security. And I would always suggest to you that we sleep safe in our beds at night, because rough men like the Flynn family stand ready to visit violence on those who would do us harm constantly. So we are a blessed nation, and we recognize the importance of working together, and that certainly applies to the world outside. We appreciate all of the countries that are represented here today. One of the great constitutional scholars that I have often quoted talks about how America's Constitution is central to many of the challenges throughout the world. He said, hold on, my friends, to the Constitution and to the Republic for which it stands. For miracles do not cluster. And what has happened once in 6,000 years may never happen again. So hold on to the Constitution. For the American Constitution should fall, there will be anarchy throughout the world. And there's no arrogance in what I just said. There is an invitation, in a sense, for us all to join the basic ideals that really are part of being a human being. And I think that in a global environment now saturated with technology and weapons that were unimagined 100 years ago, it is more important than ever for those who hold to these foundational ideas that we're all created children of God, that we're all equal in His sight, and that we all have the right to be free and to own property and to pursue our dreams and to lay hold on the miracle of life and to be able to do those things that all of us in our souls want to do. And if we want to have partnerships, I'm convinced that commonality around those basic principles is vital. Apart from that, unity in itself can be defined as just common consent of idiots. I mean, we can all get together and be unified over nothing. But if we really want to be partners, if we really want to be unified, we have to be committed to certain basic principles together. And I am convinced with all of my heart that if we are the noble nation that we started out to be, if we hold these truths to be self-evident that we're all created, and if we are the most dangerous enemy that anyone would ever come against, and the most faithful friend that anyone would ever want to have, I believe those are the basis for the partnerships that we can see desperately. And I believe if we do that, like the poet said, that the nobleness that lies in other nations, other hearts, will rise in majesty. So I'm going to stop there and introduce some of our people that are going to be coming up and visiting here this morning with us. Now, I know that we all have these little paragraphs of what we all do and things like that, and Adam was so kind to be pretty. I wish my mother turned that impression. But for the sake of being able to get through these next 50 minutes, in time for you to be able to ask questions or whatever, I'm just going to kind of just introduce these folks and hope that as they come up that they'll say, but they're all really smart. Every one of them smarter than me. That may not be a high bar, but I'm just not very time. So, Dirk Jen Epnik, as a member of the European Parliament, just a really good guy. Major General Kyung Soo Shin, Major General in South Korea. Herman Tersch is also a member of the European Parliament. Ambassador Omer Ayin, good friend. Professor Erdogan Busan, and I'm hoping all of you, as we mention your name, will go ahead and come up and approach the group. And we're looking forward to hearing from all of you. And just sit wherever you're comfortable. I'll find the empty spot. You can either come to the podium if you're opening your remarks, or you can stay where you like. But I would call on, if I could, yes, I'll be fine. Call on, if I could, Ambassador Omer Ayin, the nation of Israel, I believe, has played a profound role in the world recently, and sometimes I'm a little disheartened that this tiny nation, 10 of which would fit in my country, my state, Arizona, have had to carry the water for a lot of us to be able to guarantee some type of peace. So with that, Ambassador Ayin, I'd love for you to come forward.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. Not ambassador, just Israel Minister of Defense representative. Thank you for being here and on this camp. Israel is facing with big challenges and threats. But if you don't mind, sorry, I'm less going to talk about Israel, specific Israel, as a threat and threat was being a week before, in the middle of operations. We're still waiting to release our hostages. I want to talk about something that is a little bit more wider. Okay? You've heard spoke about, Adam spoke about. I think we are in the middle of Taiwan. I think we're in the middle of new, let's say, new global order. The traditional let's say, just borders right now that we have the old, let's say, Cold War Russia and the United States, looking about right now, regional. Right now we have threatened challenges all over the world. And it's not just a traditional threat and challenges, right? Right now we have also, of course, we still have the missiles, the airplanes, the drones, the UAVs, and of course all the technology. But I think right now we're facing, the entire world is facing also different kind of threat and challenges. We're talking about terror all over the world, not just in Israel area. We're talking about, let's say, the threats from inside the internal communities. Okay? Israel is a very small country compared to other countries that we have represented here. So I think there's a lot of things right now, the entire world, the entire country, states around the world, need to understand that we're in the middle of transition and we need to do something else. This is my opening remarks.
Somebody want to go to the podium.
Thank you very much. My name is Dirk van Epping. I'm in for Brigadier General Van Orden from the UK, who was supposed to speak here, but unfortunately couldn't make it because his visa application was declined. And anything can happen, to the best friends even of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, I would just like to say a few things about the position of a smaller country in the world like the Netherlands, one of the seafaring nations throughout the world for many centuries. And we have always been part of any coalition that keeps the navigation of ships open in the world, and that's one of the reasons why we are involved in the actions in the Red Sea, in order to make sure that the Houthis make less trouble. And we do that together with the United States and with the UK and other countries that experience with boats. Now, there are some ideas in Europe that we should have, instead of NATO, a European army. I can only disadvise that idea because the European army will not work. It will be an army of bureaucrats led by committees, always in meetings. So nothing will happen, and we do not scare any opponent that way. In fact, you invite an opponent to act against you. So we are strong supporters of NATO and of the role of the United States in it. But the West is just as strong as the United States is. I have a good friend in the Netherlands. His name is Mark Rutte. It's now a familiar name throughout the world. He's Secretary General of NATO. And before I left last year to Brussels, I told him, whatever you do in Brussels, there is no alternative to NATO, no substitute to it. And the West is just as strong as the United States is. Europe cannot replace that position. And if we look in the world now, we see that the geopolitical shifts in the world are now happening. We call it a period of transition. But the most dangerous situation in the world is a weak America. Over the past 40 years, we have seen it. And once America tends to fall asleep, other people wake up. And unfortunately, we've seen the invasion in Ukraine, which is of course an important point in Europe. But I agree with President Trump that if he had been President of the United States at that moment, Putin would not have made a bet to invade Ukraine. He would have been afraid, because he will make a calculation, it's too risky. Let's either wait So until there's another president, well, let's not do it. And what we have to deal with is therefore strong the United States. And we are facing a Russia that is a Russia that has to overcome a certain bitterness because the Soviet Union is not existing anymore. It is not a world empire, and the only thing Russia has to show the world that it is still there is about 6,500 nuclear warheads. And that turns Russia into a world power, not because of the economy. And thirdly, we have the rise of China we have to cope with. China, in 40 years ago, as a student, I went to China the first time. I took a flight to Hong Kong, and I returned to Holland by train, all through China and the Soviet Union, and Siberia, etc. And what I saw there in China was a very poor country. It was really a third world country. When I was in Shanghai, there was only the hotel that was the tallest building of 12 floors. It was the Peace Hotel. And a few tugboats on the river. If you come there now, it's a metropolis. And this all happened within one lifetime. It means that China is growing and it's looking for its place in the world and pushing left and right to get in. But it is a matter of fact that China has come and it will turmoil the international system. Finally, I would like to say that the European nations should collaborate, work together much more. We have now new indications from NATO what to do. We have to look for a negotiated settlement on the Ukraine. I'm very glad that the American president is pleading for that. In 2019, Mr. Rob Rose, who is there, and me already advised to offer the Nobel Peace Prize to President Trump. And this, of course, we were members of the European Parliament, were totally ridiculized as the worst and the most stupid ideas of these newcomers in the Parliament. But still, it's on the agenda, I would say. And therefore, I wish you all the best. But my lesson is, from a small country, keep America strong. Thank you.
Good morning. I hope you forgive my very strange English accent, and I'm speaking English once a month. So this is the first time this month. And good morning. Actually, I've been in the army. I retired in 2017. I have been in the army for 37 years in the Korean Army, and General Flynn is my big mentor and was my boss and is still my boss. I'm going to talk a little bit about Korea and North Korea and some of the Indo-Pacific issue. Let me start with a very simple fact. The Korean Peninsula is still one of the dangerous and unpredictable regions in the world. North Korea is continuing to develop nuclear weapons and long-range missiles, including ICBMs and hypersonic weapons. They're also strengthening their military ties with Russia, as you know. We now even see the reports of North Korean troops and weapons being sent to support the war in Ukraine. On top of that, they are conducting missile launches and the UAV incursions in the demilitarized zone, and that actually raised the risk of miscalculation and unintended conflict in the Korean Peninsula. China has another layer of concern. It's the military expansion and the increasingly aggressive diplomacy reshaping the regional order. One of the clear examples is the recent construction of Chinese so-called fishing facility in the West Sea of the Republic of Korea. I believe it is kind of part of the broader plan for China to turn the West Sea into a second South China Sea. So they try to change the facts on the ground and challenge the rules-based order. South Korea is not that actually sitting still. We are pressing forward with defense modernization, acquiring F-35 stealth fighters, upgrading the preemptive strike capabilities, and building a layered missile defense system. And also cyber readiness is also improving rapidly. Just as important, our combined exercise with the United States troops remains strong, showing our shared resolve and readiness to the region. And trilateral cooperation with Japan is growing steadily, and it helping us to deter any threats from every direction. Our new administration has been very clear. Korea's security and foreign policy will stay firmly grounded in the Korea-US alliance. At the same time, we are enhancing cooperation with Japan and engaging with the regional players based on realism and the national interest. President Lee has stressed the importance of maintaining a strong defense posture, firmly rooted in the Korea-US military alliance to deter North Korean nuclear threat and provocations. And this approach, I believe, aligns closely with President Trump's foreign policy direction, focusing on strength and the national interest. That's why a future summit between President Trump and President Lee could be a great opportunity to build even more common ground between Korea and the United States. The Korea-US alliance is not just about defense, it's a pillar of mutual prosperity. From 2020 to 2024, Korean companies invested over $110 billion in the United States, creating hundreds of thousands of American jobs. That's a powerful economic story, and it will keep going. Public opinion in Korea strongly supports the alliance. 96% of Koreans support maintaining Korea-US alliance. 71% support the current level of US troop presence. 74% see the United States as Korea's most important economic partner. And when it comes to the security threat, about 90% of Koreans view North Korea as a serious military threat. And the perception of China as a threat has grown. It was 64% last year, but this year is more than over 71%. The Korean people clearly understand where you stand and who we stand with us. General David Brunson, commander of U.S. forces in Korea, described Korea as a fixed aircraft carrier. I think that is exactly right. Camp Humphreys in Korea, the Pyeongtaek, the largest U.S. Army base overseas, was built with over 95% of the funding coming from Korea. And the base is facing China across the West Sea. You understand what that means. Also, the United States 7th Air Force, operating out of Osan and Gunsan, plays a critical role in maintaining air dominance not only in the Korean Peninsula but also in the region as well. Any attempt to reduce U.S. forces' capabilities on the Korean Peninsula would send shockwaves across the Indo-Pacific and give confidence to those who seek to challenge peace and prosperity. Right now, Korea pays about half the cost of stationing U.S. troops. But given our economic strength and the shared values, I believe you should consider covering the full cost. Not because we are pressured to do so, but because we believe in this alliance and in taking full responsibility as a strong and reliable partner. The Korea-US alliance is not a relic of the past. It is a living and evolving partnership. It was built on the shared sacrifice not only in Korea, but also in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. I personally experienced this alliance in Iraq 2005 and 2006 when I served as the senior commander of the Korea Jackson Division under the MNCI. A timely summit between the two Korea and the United States leaders will provide an opportunity to resolve trade issues, reaffirm alliance commitments, and set forth a bold and long-term vision for mutual benefits. We must stand united against the common threats and advance together toward a prosperous future. A stronger, more adaptive alliance is not only in our mutual interest, but it is essential to regional stability and global prosperity, and also the defense of a free and open Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm French. Nobody is perfect. I'm an academic. I've been active also because as it was said this morning, I like also to be a practitioner. So I've been a consultant for companies investing in French companies investing in Germany, and I've been also working for the government in the Ministry for Education a few years ago. But mainly my main activity has been commenting and analyzing and advising the development of French-German relationships and of the European Union. And I think that it will be my motto this morning. I think that the European Union, as we know it, has failed as a project. And I will try to explain why in a few sentences, and then I will tell you why I think that Europe is necessary, that a sound transatlantic dialogue is necessary, but on another basis than it is currently done or undone now. Well, I would start with a remark from our greatest modern statesman, General de Gaulle, in 1962. He held a not so well-known speech about sovereignty. He was speaking in front of an African audience. It was just after the decolonization. And he told his audience, well, you know, it's not enough to be independent. You must be sovereign. And what is sovereignty? Sovereignty is taking responsibility in front of the world for your independence. So I think this is what General Flynn said this morning already, but I just wanted to quote General de Gaulle because he had very clear ideas about that. And I think that one of the main problems we have currently in the European Union, as it is functioning, is that nobody is taking responsibility. That's the problem. If you want to be free, if you want to defend the constitutional order we are speaking about, you need a sovereign state, a nation state, but you need also a state where the politicians will take responsibility, where the democratic vote will be respected, and where you know that at the end there will be a new election where the people will be able to say we agree or we disagree with what has been done. Let me take a few examples of why the European Union currently is not functioning well, in spite of all what you can hear and beautiful speeches and now President Macron speaking about European sovereignty. But European sovereignty, it doesn't make sense. Why? Because Europe is not a nation, it's not a state, it's a coalition of nations, if it's something. So the question is, to know whether its nations are sovereign states working together towards a goal which has been defined together and which is being implemented together. And that's the problem we have, is that nobody is taking responsibility. There is no European strategy. We were speaking about a strategy. There is no strategy of the European Union. That's the problem we have. I'll just give an example. I've always been very agnostic, if I may say so, as far as the European currency is concerned. The euro, good thing, bad thing. Well, if I take my country, it was not such a good thing as we had thought. Why? Because thanks to the low interest rates which were allowed by the sound German economy, the President and Prime Minister of France, they said, well, we can create more debt because we can borrow at a low rate. It's really fine. What was the result? Is that now the French indebtedness is a catastrophe. Why? Because we have indebted ourselves more than we should have if we had kept our national currency. So it's just an example of how irresponsible statesmen can become if they don't think nationally, if they don't think as heads of or a prime minister of a sovereign state. I will give another example. I don't want too much French bashing in French. So I will take the big neighbor, the Germans. You know, we love them in France, and the reconciliation between France and Germany after World War II was essential to rebuilding Europe, on one side. On the other side, I must say, these last years, I didn't understand any longer what the Germans really want. Do they have a national vision? Do they know how they will contribute to Europe? Just an example. They thought they would be able on their own to compete, economically speaking, with China. Wow. I mean, second economy in the world and developing, as has been said, just been said, very fastly. And the Germans said, well, we don't need the other Europeans. We will do it on our own. Well, then the other Europeans said, well, you know, maybe it could be wise to have some tariffs protecting Europe from unfair concurrence or competition or so on. While the others, the Germans said, no, we don't need that. Free trade as an ideology, that's what we are following. Well, and you see the result today, is that we have no protection, trade protection towards China, and the share of imports, for instance, electric cars, Chinese electric cars to Germany is getting higher and higher every year, and then you have the Germany automotive industry saying, well, what is happening? We are losing the competition. Well, guys, if you had listened to the others, if we had worked together, it would have turned another way. So this is another example. I want to come now to finish my short presentation to somewhat historical aspect. What was the big strength of Europe at the end of the Cold War? We had strong United States, but we also had strong European nations. I mean, even if President Reagan didn't like it always, but when Britain said something, or France said something, or West Germany said something, well, it had weight. Why? Because these people were speaking in the name of their nations. And I think this was the strength of the Western alliance in the 1980s, which helped overthrow the Soviet Union. It was that this was an alliance of nations. And everybody was speaking. You knew that the US were stronger than the others, but the US were respecting the French view, or the West German view, or the British view, or the Italian view, because there was something like an Italian nation, a British nation, a West German nation, or German nation in making a French nation. I think the problem we have now is that you don't know what Europe, the European Union, is fighting for. And when you are asked about having this or that strategy, then they will say, well, ask Brussels, you know? But that's not an answer. As Henry Kissinger said once, well, the problem with the European community, at that time it was not yet the European Union, is that I don't have their phone number. Whom should I call? So I think it hasn't changed. It has gotten worse because, unfortunately, after the Cold War, the victory in the Cold War, we forgot the lessons of the Cold War. And my pleading, just to end this presentation, would be to say, well, we will be strong together again if we are an alliance of nations, of sovereign nations. And I think that the US is on the good way to becoming again a strong nation and a sovereign nation. I hope that the European countries will go back to the lessons of the past and rediscover it. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. I will present myself. I'm Germán Terz. I'm from Spain. I'm a member of the European Parliament, and I'm the Vice President of the group of the Patriots for Europe. That's the third group in the European Parliament. First of all, chapter of thanks. Thanks to Ellie Gold who invites me and who made me fellow in this great, great assembly of wise people. Thank you to Mike Flynn, who is an American hero, and I'm very, very proud of being here with him. Thank you to the American people for electing Donald Trump. Without Donald Trump in the White House, we would have a huge, huge problem, and probably without any possible resolution. Not a good one in any case. Thank you to Israel. Thank you to Israel for defending the Western world and for showing all the nations who have lost now memory about what is defending themselves to defend themselves. They will need it, and we will need it, all of us. Europe, the first of them. Europe is in bad shape, and Europe is not in bad shape because it has no plan. Europe is in bad shape because there is a plan, and there is a very bad plan, and this bad plan is being delivered and is being developed by forces which are against the nations, and they are dismantling the nations in a very purpose-born, taking way. They are really in the last 10, 15 years. They have made great advantages in getting all this sovereignty broken up and taking the pieces of this sovereignty to a European Commission who is not elected by anybody and who is not responsible in front of anybody, who can buy in Pfizer hundreds of thousands of vaccines, and nobody knows by now why on earth she bought so many vaccines, how many they cost, and what was the whole bargain behind this question of the vaccines. The European Union is destroying the nations because they want a globalist, unelected body governing a mass where the national governments have no role, and the municipal governments have no role, on where the families have no role, and where the societies in themselves have no role. The European Union is in this moment in a very dangerous path, and it is on a complete failure. The failure in the economic sense is absolutely enormous and appalling. We are regulating every day. We are regulating something more about the last regulation over the next regulation. We are regulating almost everything what a human being and the human life can do and can think and can imagine. Everything is being regulated. Everything is making life more difficult every day to every European, to every enterprise, to every business man, to every agriculture. Everything, everybody is suffering from that, and this is a very expensive play which they are doing with this. It's social engineering what they are doing. It's socialism what they are doing, finally. And this is very expensive, and they want the money for that. And now they have doubled the next budget. So, from one day to the other, nobody was consulted. No national parliament was consulted for doubling the budget of Ms. von der Leyen. I mean, you have to imagine what we are speaking about. That's one danger. I want to close with another danger. We have, as I say, thanks to the American people that we have Trump, we have a big danger with the development, and there G.D. Vance was absolutely right when he was in Munich and said what he said. Our enemy is inside, but we have also some external enemies, and we have the common enemies. Our common enemies are China, our common enemy is Iran, our common enemy is also Russia. Sometimes some people forget it, but also Russia. But we have another enemy which is very dangerous and which is now having an enormous importance in Europe and especially in Spain. And Spain is kidnapped by them. And that's the symbiosis between socialism and organized crime. That comes in Latin America. We have had it, or we have it all over the places. The organized crime and the narcotics are financing the whole left, the whole financial, the whole political left is financed by the organized crime. The Foro de Sao Paulo and Grupo de Puebla are criminal organizations, and they have an enormous political power and enormous political influence also in Europe. And they are directly connected to the government, socialist and communist government in Spain, and that has an influence in Brussels. So we have many different kind of interconnections between these enemies, because Iran works with Venezuela, and Sanchez from Spain works with Venezuela, and Zapatero is all over the places, in China, in Iran, in Venezuela, and in Spain. So we have a kind of global enemy who is making enormous network. That's why, and that's the plea that we, the patriots, the people who believe in nation, in borders, in family, in religion, in virtues, in principles, we have to stick together against this enormous network that we have of enemies. And here I think I am in one of these great efforts for creating this kind of enormous alliance, and that's why I'm so happy to have heard none to isolationism, because we can't be isolationists against this kind of enemies. We have built in Vox in Spain, that's the only conservative party in Spain, we have created many bodies, a foundation and groups to be networking in Latin America against this socialism, against this organized crime. It's very, very needed that we do it together. Thank you very much.
So let me thank the entire panel here. We're scheduled here for another 20 minutes, but we're trying to catch up on some time, it looks like. But we'd certainly love to take questions from the audience. Mr. Joe.
I wish I could ask each member from the panel a question, because it's very interesting. But I'm going to focus on the gentleman from Israel. And you may not be able to answer part of this, or may not want to. I would love to know the assessment of Israeli intelligence and defense about the effectiveness of the bombing on the nuclear facilities several weeks ago, number one. And number two, what are the chances of an actual regime change in Iran? Given their statements since the bombing, they don't want to give up their nuclear program, they're threatening America with military action. What can be done, if possible, to get a different government in Iran?
That's a great question.
Great questions, difficult to answer. For your first question, I'm not allowed to speak about the assessment of the. I'm sure that.
I had to ask you.
No problem. Of course, you can ask whatever you want. We can answer whatever we want. But no. The reason is, yes, it's still on. I can say like this: it's still on ongoing war. Okay. Israel, when we started the Rising Lion operation, it was because we needed to eliminate immediate threats. Okay? And this is the reason we did it. And I really agree with my partners over here that if you have a threat, you need to do it by yourself. Okay? Of course, to get assistance from your allies, it's great. But in the end, if you have a threat or a challenge that you need to face, and it's an immediate one, you need to do it. So when we did this operation, and we succeed in some of the goals that we put in our what is the goals for our operation, and this is what we did. About the assessment about the nuclear program, if there is intent, if there's still capabilities, yes. Okay? We did what we did. In some point, as already published all over, yes, we stopped some of the nuclear capabilities. By the way, it's not just the nuclear itself, it's also the military capabilities to deliver this threat. About the assessment, it's still ongoing cooperation between the United States and Israel, and I'm not allowed to speak it over here. About the regime, I can say that we are not, from our goals in this Rising Lion, we are not trying to change the regime. It's not our goal. It's supposed to be internal goal of the people of Iran, if they wanted to do it. It's not our job as outside of Iran, okay, to do this change. No.
It has to be done, though.
So if the entire world think about it, but internally in Iran, the people doesn't want to do it. Okay, but this is their. But I agree. We're not going to say no to this. Sorry, but more to follow.
We've got about 10 more minutes here. Anyone else? In the back, please.
Okay, right here, sir.
Thank you. Hi, Herman. Herman is a friend. That was an excellent summary. And I would like, please, to hear your view a little bit more on the organized crime connections with the socialist government, Pedro Sanchez in Spain, please. I know about it, but I'm interested in your viewpoint, please.
Well, the connections are long-standing connections that come from the times from Zapatero. The whole question of PDVSA, the corruption of PDVSA has been so huge. That's the oil company of Venezuela. It has been so huge, and it has many, many connections in the Socialist Party, and not only in the Socialist Party, also in the Communist Party, these little parties which were created actually by Hugo Sanchez for moving the Spanish political spectrum with success. There are many courses we have this kind of the Venezuelan oil breaking embargo in the last decades, over going to República Dominicana, changing and mixing also with the Iranian oil that is being done by people from let's say the entourage. Let me say it in this way, from the entourage of the Socialist Party, with the complicity of many of these people in the Foro de Sao Paulo and Grupo de Puebla. It's as I say, it's a crime syndicate. It's not a political organization, or mainly a crime syndicate. Then you have the connections of Delcy Rodriguez, who came secretly to Spain with lots of suitcases that come into Spain without any control. Once perchance it was discovered that that had happened, but we don't know how many times that actually happens. We know of these flights to Tehran, we know of these flights to St. Petersburg and to Istanbul, but we know by now, we know of these flights also to Madrid. And we have the Huawei story that is now there. Zapatero is doing many businesses with China. The recent visit of Sanchez to China was organized by Zapatero. The Huawei stories, now we have discovered, the Spaniards have discovered that the data of the court cases and the information of the police and the Secret Service is being maintained or held by Huawei. I mean, it's an absolute dreadful idea. It's a monstrous. It's something incredible, but the thing is done. They have they made another contract, and with this contract, it was discovered that they already were there. So we could go hours. We could go hours because the connections with all the narcotics groups which are in Bolivia, and with Petro, of course, and with Maduro and Diosdado Cabello, and with our friends of Mexico, of the cartels of Mexico and Morena. The Socialist Party has signed an agreement now of cooperation with Morena, and which has signed as well one with Russia. Morena controls the cartels in many ways. So, as I say, it's infinite. Thank you,
sir. Gentleman in the back here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nishant Motwani. I'm with the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. I'm a senior fellow and director there, looking at all things to do with deterrence in the Indo-Pacific. My question is addressed to our European friends. What steps, measures are you taking place in your international discussions about countering the threat from China? And I say this in the context of looking at your economic trade between Europe and China, where there's a significant trade imbalance of more than $600 billion. As we know, China looks at trade not as trade, it's leverage. That leverage can be politicized and also serves as can be weaponized. So I'd like to hear from you what measures are being taken, conversations that you guys are having on addressing the threat by China, because this discussion is taking place in the United States. It's certainly taking place in my country, in Australia. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for the question. I think, first of all, we should not be naive with China. In the European Parliament, initially, I was invited to address Chinese delegations in Chinese Mandarin, and I did so for some time, and there were many delegations coming to Europe. They were very well welcomed everywhere. And after a certain stage, there were so many that we were wondering, what are they actually doing here in this building? There are so many of them, and they always invite the same people in the same crowd. And they bring people of Huawei with them, and etc. Are we not being slightly naive? And then people started thinking, and when I returned to the European Parliament a couple of years later, the relationship was much more difficult. Basically, the Chinese were not that welcome anymore, and the Europeans got suspicious. And you know, China has made a roadmap to become a major power, and every country is allowed to do that, even if you're a small country, but a big country will automatically do so, and has a roadmap to it. But we should be clear that there is an international system, and you have to adhere to the rules of competition, etc. And only if you do so, then you gain your place. But the current plan of China is basically to intrude in all sorts of countries, to take essential economic parts of it and elements of that country, and by doing so, control part of your economy. And if you're naive, you're not ruling your own country anymore, but the Chinese are doing it meanwhile.
If I can answer very shortly your question, if I see that from the French point of view, as you know, we have territories overseas in the Pacific, so this is a real concern, I would say, for every French patriot thinking about defending our territories. I hope, let's say it like that, I hope that our current government is really aware of the threat. I hope so. But you have think tanks and groups working on it in France. Another aspect, as far as the European Union is concerned, I think you're right. I just evoked the question of tariff protection. I will just give an example, very short example. 10 years ago, you know, there was a huge problem with the Greek debt, and unfortunately at that time, Germany had a very harsh course, which was unilateral, and the Greeks just had to pay their debt back. I agree that everybody should pay its debt back, but for any reason they were forbidden to fund themselves, to pay it back by a better exploitation of their oil reserves in the Mediterranean. I cannot know why. This is a very interesting topic. But what was the consequence? Is that because the Greeks were really in such a state, back to the wall, as we say in French, who came? The Chinese, with their money, and said, we will help you. So you see, I think there is a real challenge of internal strategy inside the European Union. We have to think ahead. We have to think about what is the consequence of having very ideological views of how the member states should behave. If the consequence is that we bring the main competitor, if not the enemy, inside. That's a remark I just wanted to add.
We're going to take one last question in the back, and then I have a question for the panelists.
Thank you so much. My name is Freedom Rahmani from York University, professor of sociology, still not the 51st state. My question is, since my family coming from Iranian Kurdistan, since close to half a century, we are dealing with one of the most issues of international insecurity and injustice, actually, is the existing of Islamic regime in Iran. And I see internationally the regime has been enjoying from the especially European appeasement politics, including China and Russia as well. This regime has been enjoying that appeasement policies and contributing to the war and conflict in the Middle East, especially injustices around the world and terror, right? I remember when I was in Vienna in 1989, the terrorists, they killed even the Kurdistan Democratic Forces, and the Austrian regime has sent back the terrorists. And the Assman Corporation has made a fatty business with Iran. Why this policy has to be continued within, and we know that Iran is a threat to the humanity all around the world. Is this not an issue still for Europeans and outside world to stop this? And the war, unfortunately,
What was your question, sir?
Target the head of the issue in Iran. Thank you.
Which one of you thinks you can answer that the quickest? Omer, you would like to take a shot at it? Okay, for the Europeans. We've got to have the Europeans. That's right. Mr. Tersh, would you?
Well, I would say we have had a European Union whose commission has been protecting Iran the last 10 years. It may change, but it hasn't changed till now seriously. And the conservative forces which have been asking systematically for a harsher and a more solid position against the legalization and qualification as terrorist to the Guard, to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, and so on. That has been till now not the case. The conservative forces in Europe are under a lot of harassment from the side of the European Commission. That's another point where we have to see. They are openly speaking about forbidding parties in Germany, in Spain, in other places. The national patriotic parties on the right, the conservative parties, are being subject to scrutiny for trying to forbid them, because the political debate, they've lost. The Social Democrats and Socialists have lost the political debate, and now they're looking for other measures, administrative measures, legal measures, and all kinds of measures to try to curb the actions and to forbid the political positions and the parties of the conservatives. Thank you. So far we came. Thank you.
So now I have a question for each of the panelists here, and I ask you to answer briefly if you can. And I'll start with Mr. Tersh. the question at the Institute we'd like to offer to each of you is how can this Institute be of more help to people like yourself and to the efforts that you're...
Well, it's networking. It's, we need to mobilize everybody against our common enemies, and we need to mobilize everybody and to be aware about our common enemies and the networking of our enemies. Our synergies are very, very important. The flow of information, and that we know where we are and who can help you in your national position. The defenders of the nations and of freedom and of liberty have to stick together and have to fight together. Thank you.
I will give very short answers. First, sharing ideas, facts, analysis. I think this is essential, and we need to know each other better. You know, there is such an amount of misinformation, disinformation in Western Europe about the Trump administration. But maybe on the other side, I would say perhaps we can help you identify who are the people in Europe working towards a better Europe. I think that's the fact. The second aspect is why not having such an event in a European country? I mean, what you are organizing here today is wonderful, and we would be very happy to organize it in France, but also with others. Perhaps having that in a different European country every year, it would be wonderful.
I would say these kind of events that you have representatives from all around, all of not just like European Union, Israel, Middle East, Pacific. I think this is the time that we have, in a time that we have global threats and challenges that faces everyone, as we just saw. This is the time for a new alliances. This is the time for a new network of allies. This is the time to share information, ideas, experience. This is the time to stop, maybe, okay, the barriers that we have in the past. Right? Look what happened since Abraham Accord. Changed the Middle East. Look what happened since October 7th. Changed the Middle East. So I think this is the time. We're in the middle of transition. This is the time to have a new network of alliances, new alliances.
I think this is a great event, and I love that we need more, we need to explain a little bit more about the threat from North Korea and how the East Asia is facing actually against China. And I believe that all the issues, threat, and is interconnected, because as you see the example of the North Korean and Russian cooperation in war in Ukraine, and that means that all the issues is not a regional issue. It is the global issue. It's interconnected. I hope that this Gold Institute and America's Future, and hopefully they can provide another opportunity that we can talk about how the threat is interconnected and how we actually respond to that threat, world threat, the global threat together. And the Iran is also, North Korea is closely related to Iran. And so next time, I hope that General Flynn may have another opportunity to discuss about how you can solve that issue as like-minded countries, allies, and partners next time. Thank you.
Finally, well, in fact, I agree with all above. But let me add one point, and that is journalism, the media. What we see now is going on in the United States, and General Flynn talked about, is completely ignored in Western Europe. If I look at the newspapers, whether from Germany, France, or the Netherlands, or whatever, it's ignored, or if it's discussed in a complete different perspective. And basically, the public is generally disinformed about what's going on. They all think it's about Mr. Epstein. And all the rest is not discussed because the only thing we see is CNN, and the only papers quoted is the Washington Post and is the New York Times. So people in Western Europe cannot have an idea about what is going on. They get offered a completely different, non-existent perspective. And I think it would be good for us and important for us in our task to bring across these messages so that people know what's going on.
That's a great point. It's getting to be where the New York Times has to call someone, hire someone else to call their own dog. You know, the reality is I think that people are waking up, and panels like this and communications like this go a long way toward imparting more accurate information. I want to thank the panelists, and I guess I would remind all of us that there is a moment in the life of every problem, every security issue, when it's big enough to be seen and still small enough to be resolved without catastrophic cost. And I'll leave you with the words of Winston Churchill. He said, "Still, if you will not fight for the right, when you can easily win without bloodshed, if you will not fight when your victory will be sure and not too costly, you may come to the moment when you will have to fight with all the odds against you and only a precarious chance of survival. There may be a worse moment. You may have to fight when there is no hope of victory, because it is still better to perish than to live as slaves." God help us to aim ahead and work together so that we don't have crises like we've had in the past. Thank you all very much.
We have, this is great. I mean, this is really good. I just want to give you a little bit of an update. And we have a special guest here that's not only a good friend, but is going to be taking on a huge role in our government. So we've been, since we started this morning, we're averaging about 55 to 60,000, because this last comment from our friend from the Netherlands, I believe, we're averaging about 55 to 60,000 per hour on our live stream. So like this thing that you're looking at right up here, that is what is being streamed out on multiple platforms, and so we have about close to 60,000 that are just constantly staying on. So when we talk about, and it's wherever the internet exists, right, or wherever it's free, people are watching. So, and people are paying attention. So anyway, we are, you know, of course, we're always get behind in these things. I did add a little bit of fluff time toward the end of the day as we go. So I want everybody to know that are going to come up on various panels. We're going to continue to do that. Because I have heard back from, actually from Tulsi and from the Secretary of State as well, just because of everything going on, because they were going to be special guests. But another special guest that is able to make it is Joe Kent here. And Joe and I have known each other for a few years now. He's from the great state of Washington, out in the northwestern corner of our country. He's a former Special Operations Green Beret in the U.S. military, very, very brave guy and courageous guy. And because of his background, his expertise, and really his strategic sense and strategic view of the world, he's been nominated, and he's going through the final confirmation process to be the next director of the National Counterterrorism Center. And the thing that I've learned about the world of terrorism, and we saw our president designate basically criminal cartels, these drug cartels, these money laundering cartels, as foreign terrorist organizations. So there is, as we have been talking about, there is an interconnectedness of what is going on in this very complex world that we are in. And I can tell you, because all you got to do is tell me which country you're from, and I'll tell you some of the problems that you're having, just like I can tell what problems we're having here in this country with drugs. Just drugs alone, never mind the thing I did, the interview that I just did. I just talked about child sex and slavery trafficking, okay? And I'm embarrassed to say that the United States of America is number one in that, and number one in the consumption of illegal drugs, right? It's crazy, but it's just the way it is. And so it's embarrassing on one hand, but I'm standing up here to tell you that we have a leader that has decided to go after these things, connect two things, because when you think about criminals, we always reacted to a crime, right? Crime occurs, we have the law enforcement come in, they investigate, they try to find the criminal. When you're a terrorist, and you're a designated terrorist, you can be very proactive. Very proactive. I know that world well. And that means that you can look at intelligence, you can look at the different things that are going to happen, and you can be far more proactive in getting inside of these organizations and destroying them. Not being kind to them, destroying them. And they have to be, and they exist in all parts of the world. And you guys, I'm preaching to the choir, but we're part of that choir, right? These days. So anyway, I'm blessed here that Joe was able to take some time to come in here. He's a very busy guy. He's still a key advisor to Tulsi. And so with that, Joe, I'll turn the mic over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, General Flynn. It's a true honor to be here. He probably doesn't remember this, but a little bit over 20 years ago, he was leading the intelligence effort for the Joint Special Operations Task Force in Iraq. And this was a really critical time. We were attempting to run down the al-Qaeda network that was there, al-Qaeda in Iraq. And we had a bunch of different units from the military and the intelligence community who were all kind of operating in different siloed elements as opposed to working together to get after the common enemy. And so with General Flynn's leadership, we started to put together these small teams of analysts and operators to get closer to the targets. And once we were able to do that, we were able to actually crush al-Qaeda in Iraq. And that set the template basically for how we do counterterrorism nowadays. And that ties into exactly what he was just saying about the threat that we have from the criminal cartels that President Trump designated as terrorist organizations. Now, President Trump designated them as terrorist organizations for one simple fact. They are killing Americans in absolutely unacceptable numbers. We've had anywhere between 50 to 100,000 Americans killed per year for the last few years by these cartels. So President Trump took decisive action, declared them as foreign terrorist organizations. And now we're able to leverage the full scope of U.S. power from the intelligence community to the military to our law enforcement partners against these terrorist organizations. And that's what's taking place right now. And it ties directly into what we were doing 20 plus years ago, where we were getting different elements from the military and the intelligence community to cooperate. We're doing the exact same thing right now from ODNI, from the National Counterterrorism Center, getting law enforcement and the intelligence community to work together to identify not just the networks here on the south side of the border, or on the north side of the border, but also on the south side of the border as well, and how they all tie in together. And so collaborating with each other within the federal government is a critical part of that. But also working with our partners throughout the world is going to be critical. We're working hand in hand with the Mexican government. We're working hand in hand with many South American governments as well. And because the product that the cartels produce, these narcotics, whether it's cocaine or whether it's fentanyl, methamphetamines, because it's a business and there's a massive demand for it, as we secure our southern border, which President Trump and the Secretary of Defense have done so effectively, we're seeing a balloon effect of a lot of that fentanyl and the other narcotics are going to other places. So we're working hand in hand with Five Eyes partners, partners in Asia, partners throughout the entire world, because there's such a market for these narcotics that we're seeing the cartels continue to be able to sell those products. So the interconnectivity of everything, I think, is absolutely essential. I think conferences like this, where we can network and we can find like-minded folks, whether they're here domestically or they're international, I think it's absolutely essential. So I'm looking forward to hopefully my confirmation. I'm honored to be a part of this administration, and really, General Flynn, I'm honored to be here and speak with you all today. So thank you very much.
Okay, I have no idea what we're supposed to do next. Go ahead. Okay. Trent, you got it? Good. Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Listen, if you want to take 60 seconds, no more, stand up and breathe a minute so that I know you've been sitting a long time.
Here now. We're going to be talking about, when I turn it back over to you again, that's when I'll say something about you. Yeah, you don't even have to say anything. I'm going to say, don't cover, I'll come up with that. It's okay. Okay, it's all right, it's all right. And so you'll have this one, and we'll just give you that one, and we'll go back. back and forth real quick. Yeah, this should be one we can make up some time. Because there's just a smaller group. I don't know what time is scheduled for it.
Make that 5 minutes, 60 seconds. I'm 78 years old. I need more than 1 minute to stand up.
That's great.
How are you?
Urav Shrivastava. Okay, I said that.
I texted you yesterday. I don't know if you got my text.
No, I did not. That's all right. We'll talk about it.
Hey, Congressman, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. How are you doing?
Fellow.
Yes, sir.
He's been in meetings.
I hope we can.
But as I'm sitting here, I have an idea, actually. Yeah, so I was wondering if you're going to be here all day?
I am. Well, toward the end of it, for sure. I'll have to leave and come back.
Yeah.
Okay, bye. I look forward to it.
Good to see you.
You too. All right, can we have your attention? All right, can we have, well. So let me suggest to you in full disclosure here, we're going to be talking about energy, and I am terribly biased, okay, because my background is oil and gas. Some of my very first memories in life were looking up at an oil rig out on the northeastern plains of Colorado in the wintertime, holding my dad's hand as a little boy. So I am not neutral related to some of the energy discussions that we have. At the age of 17, I became the youngest drilling contractor in the state of Texas, and I have been doing work like that ever since. I'm blessed today. I don't even know if he's in the room, but I'm with one of my business partners here, Tony Singh. Is he out there? I guess I don't see him out there. But in any case, we do some work in Australia. The reason I said that up front is because I want you to know sincerely, it might sound unbelievable, but I truly do hope that we can leave open free minds and a commitment to embracing any plausible energy source that will meet the needs of America and the world. The reality is about 80%, a little bit more than 80% of the world's energy needs are supplied by what we call fossil fuels, coal and gas and oil. I think the time will come when we will see that was a misnomer to call them fossil fuels. But I would refer you to a book by Epstein called Fossil Future. There's nothing in my mind that would give you a better perspective of the energy challenges that we have. I'm convinced that we are going to need more fossil fuels, more energy than ever. There's a lot of reasons for that. But one of the challenges that we have is we have nothing that can replace fossil fuels for the moment. I know there's a lot of sincere people that want to see us have green replacement, and I'm all for it if we can make it work. But the only thing that even comes close to being able to meet the energy needs of the world right now, with all of the output and the growth that we have, is nuclear energy. And right now, the same people that are against fossil fuels are also against nuclear energy. And it's just kind of a matter of physics. We've been waiting on cold fusion We've said it was 30 years away 30 years ago. And now cold fusion has become sort of an exaggeration in our nomenclature, and I'm convinced that we're going to have to move more toward hot fusion and neutral beam injection, some of the things that really do hold out hope for some hydrogen fuels. A lot of possibilities are there. And America and the free world, with free minds and a commitment to a free market approach, we can meet the energy needs of humanity. But without machine energy, without the energy to be able to do the power industry, we're back in the days of caves. And I can't express to you how significant that is. So I'm not going to go on and give you a lot more insight on that, if you want to call it insight. I'm going to turn now to Mr. Rob Roos, and Rob is a friend of mine. I think you were a member of the European Parliament for a long time, and yeah. And Sri Servistavasta. I probably said that wrong.
You can say it.
See, I started to say it right, but if he got the emphasis on the wrong syllable. And
I can say my name.
So listen, if I could turn it over to Rob here, and you have an opening thought here.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me here. I want to thank Ellie Gold and General Mike Flynn for organizing this wonderful event. I hope that will be the kickstart of many, many more. I look forward to energy security. Affordable energy is on top of everyone's mind, and that is understandable. Energy is life. Energy is food. Energy is warmth. Energy is economic growth. Energy is order. Energy is civilization. Without affordable energy, we have hunger, cold, economic decline, disorder, and the end of civilization. Energy is not only a matter of national security, it is a military warfare strategic weapon. So why is the European Union obsessed with climate change, doing an energy transition that is impossible according to the law of physics? To be honest, I really don't understand. I'm still puzzled. Carbon, CO2, is not poison like the left liberals want us to believe. CO2 is the very fertilizer that feeds our crops. It is the food of our food. And the EU is responsible for only 6% of global emissions. So we don't make any impact, and we still spend trillions of euros on it. In my view, it's less about environmental necessity or more about advancing a broader UN-led agenda with sustainable development goals. Unelected bureaucrats seize even greater power, and a small circle of green tech investors reap enormous profits, paid for by the hard-earned taxes of ordinary EU citizens. But that is, of course, a conversation for another day. The European Union relies heavily on imported natural gas. 88% of its 2024 supply came from non-EU sources. Of that, roughly 63% arrives via pipelines, chiefly from Norway, Algeria, Libya, and Azerbaijan. The remaining 37% is shipped as LNG, half of which originates from the United States. So why didn't the EU member states scale up on time? Former NATO Secretary General Rasmussen warned the West in 2014 already about sophisticated information and disinformation operations of Russia. Russia engaged actively with German environmental NGOs working against shale gas to maintain dependence on important Russian gas. Unfortunately, no one listened,
and Russia was very successful. In 2020, Russia exported nearly 3 times more gas than Europe produced. What is amazing is that Europe increased its reliance on Russian gas even more after Gazprom repeatedly suspended pipeline exports to Ukraine. Germany's response was to build the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to make itself less dependent on gas flowing through Ukraine. But then we had the Biden administration. Was it an ally or was it an enemy? The US fracking boom after the late 2010s had created a massive surplus of natural gas, causing the Henry Hub spot market price to fall below $6 for a megawatt hour by the early 2020s. The US fracking industry, funded to the tune of billions of US dollars by the financial sector, and as a logical consequence, significant parts of the US financial systems were on the verge of bankruptcy in view of this price development. This is because these investments were made with minimal equity but large amounts of debt. The only way to prevent this impending collapse was to expand into the EU market, particularly targeting Germany, the largest natural gas importer in the region with an annual demand of around 100 billion cubic meters. However, before the onset of the war in Ukraine and the sanctions against Russia, US LNG was roughly 7 times more expensive than Russian pipeline gas flowing into Germany, leaving Germany and its industrial sector with little incentive to choose American gas. Under normal circumstances, rational decision-making such a switch would have been entirely illogical. The Nord Stream 2 terrorist attack changed that completely. So there was, let's say, a motive for the US to sabotage Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Biden himself also said he would do it if Russia would invade Ukraine. And then it happened. In comparison to the $6 per megawatt hour in the early 2020s, as of mid-December 2024, the spot market price in Europe for natural gas in the EU reached a peak of more than $350 per megawatt hour, almost 60 times more expensive. I don't have to explain what the impact is on our economies and our competitiveness. That was a peak. The price has come down, but it's still way more than it was before the attack on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Meanwhile, the European Commission embraced energy austerity, which increased the crisis. Europe is squeezed. Policies aimed at reducing both production and consumption have driven costs upward, spurred industrial flight out of the European Union, and raised the specter of blackouts that were once unthinkable. And it happened already in Spain. My view on the situation is that we must chart a course that balances affordability, reliability, and sustainability. The situation in Europe is really bad. Heavy industry is leaving Europe, steel production, chemical industry, etc. And we need to explore short-term relief, reopening mothballed fossil and nuclear plants, as well as long-term strategies. A true nuclear renaissance is needed. We need technological neutrality in energy choices with market-driven innovation like small modular reactors. The fact is that the European Commission's communist idea of energy austerity is a myth. We need much, much, much more energy than we can imagine, and the reason is AI. It's time to move beyond ideology and climate hysteria, to follow facts and free market ingenuity rather than rigid mandates. Only then we can secure energy that is quite literally the lifeblood of our societies, and look forward with confidence rather than fear. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Gora Shrivastava. You call me G. And I'm here on the request of Ellie Gold and General Mike Flynn, both of whom are very, very dear friends. I made some remarks, wrote down, but as I sat here today, I thought maybe it's better to just address the issues at large. I was listening to the speech by Herman, gentleman from Spain, and I think the issues that you addressed are issues that the United States is facing. The reality is, I think we are being ganged up on. There is no difference between Venezuela, Iran, Russia, China. If you look at the list of the enemies, I think the enemies are all. The biggest issue, I think, we talked about the Trump administration. We've been talking about the Biden administration. The issue is, I think we're in some sort of a Netflix diplomacy. It's like my Netflix stream. I wake up and I say, today I want to watch this movie. And then I change the stream again. So it's for every 2 years, I cannot decide what movie I want to watch. And that's, if you ask any of our allies, or who have been standing with us for a long time, you ask them, what is the policy the U.S. wants? Every 2 years, we change our policy. The Kurds, I mean, I see them in the audience, who have been great allies of us for a long time, fought with us side by side. You ask them, they should not be asking for our request. We should know who our allies are. The same thing what you tweeted with Afghanistan, Laura. We should not be leaving our friends and ask the question, what's happening there? The question here, this forum is about oil, so I don't want to go off topic. But oil is an intelligence tool. Oil is the perspective of having oil. I don't see it changing in the next century. If you look at Asia today, or you look at Europe, you look at Africa, the philosophy that China has, it is a philosophy that it's a Confucius philosophy, which says 1,000 friends too few and one enemy too many. They know that in order to beat the United States, they cannot do it militarily. So they have to do it economically. They have to destroy it from within. And how do you destroy it from within? You start questioning the very sense of identity, which is being American. I mean, there isn't a more patriot than General Flynn, who was subjected to one of the most vicious media campaigns. I was subjected to a very vicious media campaign, which is the next forum we talk about, the alternative media. The media which has been bought and paid for. The systems which have been bought and paid for. The Biden administration, which had situations where lobbyists were paid off for influencing policy on behalf of people that were sanctioned. One of them was from Netherlands, who was working on behalf of Russia. So the question, I think, really, which we have to look back and say, when we create a policy like the national security document, which the Gold Institute is putting together, we have to maybe think about putting together a plan of the next century. Where is America going to go? The blueprint of what is America going to do in the next century. So that every 2 years or 4 years, we don't wake up and we don't have a blueprint. It may not be right, it may not be wrong, but there is a blueprint. And having a forum like this allows you to have that kind of a dialogue. You know, the elephant is one of my favorite animals. And, but having an elephant is it's benevolent, it's mighty, but you don't want it in your kitchen. And having America is having an elephant in your kitchen. It will break even if they don't want to. And making sure that we are aligned in the right path when it comes to using oil is, I think, critical. Now, if you talk about China, the reason they are able to have the kind of growth they're having is because they are buying cheap oil from Iran. Is because they are buying cheap oil from Venezuela. They're buying cheap oil from Russia. So when we say China is having an exponential growth, it's not because they have a great strategy. It's because they have been able to evade every sanction that there is. And yet we sit back and talk about diplomacy. The same thing is true with Russia. And so when you look at the map and you see what's happening, they're cutting up the world as if it's an empire. Russia has its empire, China has their empire, and you talk about, you know, Africa, everyone's creating an empire. And the United States and its Western allies, a rule-based order, we're looking at each other and destroying ourselves from within. You know, Bin Laden, in one of his writings, he said, in order to destroy America, you need to hit them once, and they will destruct themselves. We did that in 9/11. We started going down rabbit holes in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and pulling out of those countries. We're leaving nothing but just plunder. So I think the questions that we need to ask are much larger. I think the questions are, oil is a tool. Oil is not just about switching on a light bulb, because I think when you look at groceries, which is, I think, the biggest issue here, if you look at the pump, the gas price is rising. And I can give you I can quote you things which ChatGPT can quote you about how the price is going up and how the market is moving. But the question to me is, and I talked about this in Lara's podcast, is when a single mother goes to the gas pump and she sees the price per gallon high, she does not understand this Russia and China and Iran. But everyone in this room does. So it is our moral obligation, or divine providence, to be able to figure out how to make sure that she's okay. So you have to work the problem backwards, because everyone is working the problem from up here and not actually understanding what is the effect of the problem. So that is the core of the issue. And there is, I think the United States is being attacked in what is called asymmetric warfare. We cannot be beaten militarily. And China has figured that out, Russia has figured that out, Iran has figured that out, and there is no difference. North Korea has also figured that out. So the question to really ask is, how does the EU, how does the UK, how does the United States, and how do people who are quote-unquote our allies, which is a very subjective term, get together and make a plan on understanding what is actually oil being used for? Because oil, when you talk about narcotics, General Flynn just talked about the biggest problem in America being drugs. The Venezuelans are using drugs that is being laundered from their system and then sending that money and then using oil as a currency to launder the money straight to make it clean. And you talk about it. It's happening in Spain. It's happening all over the EU. So this is my opinion, my humble opinion. You should sit back and think on the problem at large, and not get too caught up in the minutiae of the details. Because it's like I think the entire United States and a lot of the Western world is like this cat with the red pointer. And we're running and chasing the red dot. But the problem needs to be understood larger. And I'll leave with this remark, which I think that the time is still there. I think I think time is our friend in terms of the dollar. The economy is doing very well. I don't think there will be anybody coming in. The BRICS currency is not going to come and take over us tomorrow. But to keep in mind, Indonesia, which is one of the largest Muslim countries in the world, the fourth largest, I think, they have joined BRICS now. And it was very strategic. The president of Indonesia, he chose to attend the summit with Putin instead of the summit with President Trump. And he said, if I heard his remark, he said that was because he had made a promise. Maybe, but you know who your friends and allies are. And Indonesia is interesting because Indonesia is producing the size of Singapore every year. That's their demand. They're producing the size of Singapore every year. And they have the largest continuous islands. So you are now in the South China Sea with somebody who is going to be allied with Russia and China. So that is, I think, that's how the world is being shaped up. And I think what I would request Ellie to think about, and people in this conference to think about, is how do you come up with a plan for the next century and actually understand oil for what it is, which is oil is an intelligence tool. For most states, it is a state-controlled commodity. And that's where I think we're going. But I think there's still time. I think the U.S. is with President Trump, it is very clear that he understands that energy security is critical to national security. And weaving that in the agenda, and weaving that in the policy that is going to be made from there on, is very critical. So, thank you very much.
Well done. So we have a little less than 10 minutes. Yes, sir.
Ideally, did require a rip and replace of embedded problems in our supply chain, which are attacking our critical infrastructure, including energy. And we're getting blacklists now for to the utility executives. What do you see, and that's not a regular warfare strategy, what do you see us doing to affect the fact that China doesn't need to attack us offensively? They're embedded in our critical infrastructure and energy.
I just happen to know that this man is very involved in trying to protect the grid from electromagnetic pulse attacks and other cyber attacks and things like that. As it happens, I'm going to take a quick shot at this and pass it along to the others. I chaired the EMP caucus in Congress, and I would just say to you that for the future, we are going to have to understand these new applications of warfare. In physics, you got four major forces. You've got the gravity, and we're still talking about that, believe it or not. You've got the nuclear weak force, nuclear strong force, and electromagnetic force. Electromagnetic force is the most powerful of those forces. So consequently, we are going to have to deal with that because that will be something that enemies will exploit and will weaponize. And it has everything to do with our ability to be able to distribute energy. And Gustav, Mr. Gu, yeah, just stick with G. You know, Srivastava. See, I said it. Okay, I said it. So I was very impressed with your comments. Would you like to take the first shot at this gentleman's question?
I think when it comes to China, they are very strategic in how they look at the world. I think they're very strategic on what infrastructure to pick. They have a very similar problem. They're doing this very similar structure with the tank farms, where they control the blending, where they control the flow, and using new technological weapons is a way that they will advance their agenda. I think one of the things that is to be thought about is they are a country in which the state controls all the businesses. The United States, I think, is the only country where you have Elon Musk criticizing the president, and he's still around. If Jack Ma did that, you knew what happened there, and that should be celebrated. So, I think the more it is talked about, the more it is discussed in these forums, and using media, not the one that's paid for, but media, to get the word out, I think is the best way to advance that forward.
Anyone else? Rob, did you want to take a shot at that question? I thought maybe you might.
Yeah, but I'm
take
not
shots
very
next.
aware of. Maybe I can say something. Yeah, I'm not very aware of what's going on with the grid here in the United States. My background, I'm an electrical engineer, and I designed this grid when I was a young boy after my study. I can imagine what it does, but we have. I think it was 2 months ago that it was discovered that China was creating all kinds of backports in the grid facility in the United States. So, yeah. The thing is, we have seen it also in Europe with Huawei. They are very sophisticated and very quiet and very under the radar and doing all kinds of things. So yeah, I think we should be prepared for everything. Yeah, they are really up to no good. And it, of course, energy is a strategical warfare thing that they can use. But yeah, that's all I can say about it because I am not aware of the situation yet.
Well, the unrestricted warfare, all of you pay attention to that. Anyone else? Joe, you're the only guy raising your hand again here, buddy.
Well, my comment is going to be a little bit off point of the panel, but I think it needs to be said because this is a conference on strategic situations in the world. The one of the things that the United States and to some extent Western Europe have that we never talk about, which is a great strength, is private sector ownership of our energy sector. You know, if Saudi Arabia wants to try to set oil prices through OPEC, at one time they could do that. You know, the king and his advisor sit around and they say, okay, we want the oil price to be $110 a barrel, and they can enforce it. Well, a little thing called the ability to export American oil, which I passed in 2015, oil from which you produce some of, the oil price is set by the world markets. I just checked my app, the basket case for OPEC is $71 a barrel, and the price of West Texas Intermediate $66 a barrel, and it's set. So we let people like Trent Franks own oil production, own oil leases, and the private sector, through give and take, decides how you allocate that, and that's a real strategic asset for us.
That's a big one. That's a big one, Joe.
Y'all at some time do a conference on it.
Well, I endorse your comments. That's a big one. I'm going to turn it over here to G here momentarily. You know, they said that the fires of Kuwait would burn 100 years until a bunch of Texans figured out they could make some money, and they burned 100 days. So there is something very powerful about the private market and private enterprise. It's just stunning.
You know, Joe, we were talking yesterday, and I think that is also one of the reasons why China will actually never be a superpower, is because the innovation that you just described of the private sector that the United States has is one of the reasons why we continue to remain one of the most advanced countries in the world. I just remember what Reagan said. He said, you can be from France, you're a Frenchman. You're from Turkey, you're a Turk. But you come here, you're an American. And I think we attract the best minds from the world. We attract the best private sector companies in the world. And I think what you're saying is very much in line with that vision. And having a president who makes American be cool again is a really important thing. And I think, I mean, if you look at, like before, like they were kneeling on the flag, and you start stripping away the identity, you start questioning whether I'm a man or a woman. And you start breaking what is basically American, which is the core of everything we do. So I completely agree with you that that is the key.
I also agree. That's why I said free markets is a real solution. And I want to mention Milton Friedman. He wanted to have a government as small as possible, and he was the one. He said, I want also to abolish the Ministry of Energy, and he only wanted to have the nuclear part as a part of the defense ministry, and for the rest, leave it up to the market. And this is really the problem of the European Union. They not only telling what to do, but also how to do it. They think that legislation creates innovation, but of course it's the mindset of a bureaucrat. It's the other way around. So fully agree. Let the market do the work. Technological neutrality is really the solution, and markets will come up with great solutions.
Very short question. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm sorry. You got it.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I know my voice won't carry from over there. I'm Bayan. I'm from the Kurdistan region in Iraq. Kurdistan region in Iraq is blessed with a lot of oil and gas, and we're also blessed to be partners and allies of the United States. Our Prime Minister was in Washington in May, and he announced 2 energy deals with American companies. On his return to Kurdistan, many things happened since then. It's been a very busy few months in our neighborhood. But very recently, in the past week or so, we have received many drone attacks across the Kurdistan region, but significantly, 2 American oil companies that have been operating in Kurdistan region were hit by drones. As a result, we have lost 200,000 barrels a day of production. This is what happens to American allies in the Middle East. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Cold fusion. I just want to know if it has a role to play.
Well, I mentioned cold fusion. I didn't know she was going to ask this question. I think cold fusion is probably going to kind of fall off the table. Hot fusion, totally different situation. Again, very complex question, but hot fusion has a lot of hope. The challenge with fusion is to create the plasma. You have to have millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of degrees, and we can't figure out anything to hold that except a magnetic field. And then the challenge is, of course, is that a lot of the energy escapes. So we're not anywhere close in that regard, but I think it is something in the long run that could be amazing.
I just want to comment on this. You know, Bayan, the comment you made is I think what I was talking about. When the Prime Minister was here, he announced deals like for the region, which was tremendous. When he went back, Iran pressured Baghdad to start making a lot of noise. And the United States does not have an ambassador right now in Iraq. We don't have an ambassador in the UAE. And so there is no helpline to call and say, this is what fucked up on the ground. Sorry. It's not working on the ground. So I think, but that to her point, having someone who has been an ally for a very long time, feeling that we're not there anymore, is very troublesome. And I think putting together a plan where allies don't start questioning their alliances with the United States is precisely, I think, what this conference is addressing. So I hope we can do that better now.
Well, thank you all. We're going to turn it over to Boone. You know, Boone's been very patient with all of us, especially those of us that just kind of winging it here. And Boone is a hero. This guy is a brilliant author. He's been a great soldier, and he's been just a general all-around badass. And we really appreciate you, Boone. So here you go. Thank you all.
Thank you. Give him a round of applause, everybody. Round of applause. Please take your seats. Up to the front here. Can I please get Jack Posobiec? Can I please get Laura Logan and Congressman Eli Crane? These three seats right here. Just come on right over. Congressman, would you take the first one? And Laura, you take the second one. And then Jack, would you take the third one right there? Come on over here, sir. And I'll let you hold on to this since you're going to go first. And I'm going to speak through here. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the segment where we start talking about alternative media. And the reason I get the blessed opportunity to kind of moderate this section is because I've written 3 books with General Flynn on 5th generation warfare. When we talk about manipulation, we talk about influence, we talk about all the things that come into this cognitive battle space. And each one of the people up here has had something, has been affected in that space. Whether it's a politician, whether it's a 30-year journalist, or whether it's an intelligence officer that's come into the media, the game has changed when it comes to media. Legacy media is kind of dying out. And we've got the alternative media right now, but we have to ask ourselves, what is the alternative media? Because one person will say it's one thing, another person will say it's another thing. So I want to lead off with that question, starting with Congressman Crane. First of all, tell us a little bit about yourself, how the alternative media helped you in your campaign, because it was very significant, and what do you consider alternative media?
Yeah, well, thank you for allowing me to be here, and thank you guys for coming. You know, it's interesting being up on a panel with these two guys. They're definitely the subject matter experts when it comes to media. You know, they create media, and they've done a good job, I think, alerting Americans to so many things that the mainstream does not cover. And as somebody who comes from a service background and a business background, and was watching the direction of where this country was headed, and decided to try and get up here to do everything I could to, you know, keep us as free and prosperous as I grew up, and many of us have been blessed to grow up with here. I've really been able to benefit from alternative media and some of what these guys do. First, in running for office, many of you guys know there is an establishment up here. You know, often we refer to it as the uniparty. They don't typically like guys like me, and so they try and do everything in the world to keep us from getting up here, because they know, or they fear, that we're not going to play ball when we get here. And so just getting in, you know, was difficult. Especially in my race, we were taking on an incumbent Democrat. Right. And unlike a lot of candidates who, you know, want to just get on Fox News all the time, I was doing podcasts and, you know, multiple, you know, countless interviews with alternative media. And that really helped me get my message across to the people. It helped me raise the resources to get up here. And I would say one of the other great things about it is it's allowed me in many ways to stay ahead of the curve, because when you follow guys like these, and like a War Room show with Steve Bannon, I feel like you're always 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months ahead of everybody else, because the mainstream media tends to look at, they're almost like, you know, sitting on a panel and they're looking at the other mainstream shows and like, well, are they going to cover it? Are they going to cover this? Is this too dicey? Well, then we're not going to cover it. And they often have a lot of, I think, self-imposed reflections because of some of their sponsors and donors. Yep. And so it's been a blessing for many of us that are kind of outsiders.
Follow-up question on that. Do you think you could have become a congressman without the alternative media?
Not in this environment, no.
No. Good. Laura, you've been in the media game for about 30 years now, maybe a little bit more. You've seen the media change. You started out in the legacy media. You were a leader there, leading shows, top shows. Now you've slid over to alternative media. What changed? What changed for you, and how would you define alternative media?
I object to the term slid.
Slid.
It was more like a crash and burn, nuclear explosion. I would say, I don't slide anywhere, boo. I announce my presence with authority. Okay? So, well, I would say what changed wasn't me, actually. I did everything the same way I had always done it. I believed we were a force for truth and for good in the world. And I worked with many great journalists. And so it's a little bit different for me. When you're on the outside of that, like I would meet people like you all the time, especially on the battlefield, and they would tell me how biased the media was. And I was perplexed because nobody told me what to put in my stories. But it's what you talk about, that kind of self-censorship. And it's born out of two things in the mainstream media. One, it's born out of the fact that it's a recruiting ground for people who think and see the world the same way. So most people within the mainstream media, I would say, before the election of Donald Trump, if we can look at the media in terms of pre-2016 and post-2016, I think that will help you understand the shift in the media environment. Because we went from a place where there was an intrinsic bias born out of accepted narratives that were propagated really within the education system. So long before the media became compliant, the education system was overtaken. And that really reaches right back to the Franklin School, pre-World War II, when Columbia University made an alliance with Marxists out of Germany and the takeover of the Department of Education. And these things can't be overstated how important they are, because you literally just don't encounter anyone who thinks a different way within that media space. And if you do, if there are journalists who maybe are pro-life or something, they don't speak up, because they're outnumbered. And you just know that those ideas are not going to be accepted. Then when you look at the fact that we instituted systems of punishment, right? So organizations like Media Matters for America, I don't understand why those people are still breathing. I really don't. I mean, they're oxygen thieves of the worst kind. These people seek to destroy. They wake up every day and their mission is to destroy. And they're evil and they're well-funded and they're well-connected. So when you have organizations like that, they work with the media organizations and they create an environment in which truth and integrity is punished and deception and cowardice is rewarded. So journalists self-select on their stories, and they do. And so for me, what happens, I followed the story, I followed the truth, and when it came up against politics, I didn't think for a moment that anyone would put politics over the truth. That's how naive I was. And I was, the future of 60 Minutes, the greatest news program in the world, in history. And I was the chief foreign correspondent. And we just did and we worked hard. That's the other thing for people to understand, is when you look at the media and you criticize everything, what's being lost is real profound institutional knowledge and hard work in the craft of journalism. What has led us here is a lack of moral courage, but also complicity. At this point, the media are co-conspirators in the seditious conspiracy to overthrow the government of the United States and an attack on this country in the most profound way. You can only put Adam Schiff on TV so many times before you recognize that you're promoting a dishonest political agenda. So you can no longer defend that. You can't defend putting John Brennan on television at this point. There's no defense of that. So I think it's very important to me for people to recognize when the media transitioned from self-interest and just general moral cowardice and laziness to actually being co-conspirators in treason and sedition.
Thank you very much. Jack, I got a big question for you. Give her a round of applause, everybody. Jack, I've watched you, from the beginning, kind of come up this ladder here. You come out of the Navy as an intelligence, from the intelligence community in the Navy. And I watch your style, okay? But for the audience here, I'd really like you to tell everybody how your style from that intelligence community affects and shapes the media that you do, and how big of a factor is that in the strength of alternative media?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And thanks again to General Flynn and the entire team for putting this together, for having us on. I'll mention it because most people don't always know the backstory that when I was in Navy intelligence, I was at one point assigned to the Defense Intelligence Agency. I was deployed to Guantanamo Bay, worked in the J2X interrogation cell down there in the Human Operations Center, and the director of the DIA at that time, all those years ago, is sitting in the front row right here. That was General Flynn, who I served under in the DIA. So a lot of people don't realize how much of a backstory that so many of the people in this room have, that through a completely precipitous series of events have now ended up in this place. And so when you talk about the style that I have is the style that I was trained on as first in intelligence. I was enlisted and then became later an officer. And I remember always being taught, be good, be brief, be gone, and have the bluff. Put the bottom line up front. Remember the bluff, General? So it's you've got to have that big headline. You'd say headline in today's parlance, but it was, what's the so what? What is the so what? I could put up a briefing slide in front of you and walk you through all of the different net connections and all of the different background on any specific problem set, whether it be a terrorist cell, whether it be a Chinese Communist Party influence network, whatever it might be, smuggling, etc. But if I'm not giving you the so what right up front, then I'm wasting your time, and I'm wasting everyone's time. And so when I bring my approach to whatever it is you call I do, independent media, that's something that's always deeply ingrained in my mind. Be good, be brief, be gone, and be clear. If you're not speaking with clarity, then you're not properly communicating, because effective communication begins with that. And it's so interesting looking at, as you say, this journey from being inside the intelligence services to now in independent media. I took my children to the International Spy Museum, which is just a few blocks away here. For the first time ever, this new one they constructed. And I said, wow, they should really call this place the Constructed Reality Museum, because that's what it is. It's a museum not about the intelligence community. It's actually a museum created by the intelligence community to give you a vision of a constructed reality that has some resemblance to reality, but everything's just slightly off. And what do I mean by this? I mean, this is the cover story. This is the false reality that you would get if you read the pages of the Washington Post or the New York Times, or if you're watching CNN and listening to NPR. This is the reality where, of course, Russia hacked the election, where COVID-19 was a natural origin virus that came from apparently a bat making out with a pangolin and ending up in some soup in a wet market. And if you say anything that's beyond Hunter Biden's laptop, again, Russian disinformation, all of these things which we know and all of us have learned are completely true. And everyone knows the list. I could go on and on about these things. But when you walk into that Constructive Reality Museum, you realize the amount of money and the amount of force and the amount of huge dollar bank accounts that are put into maintaining this illusion of a false reality, recruiting people who are willing to go along with the false reality, as you encountered in mainstream media, because they don't actually push beyond the boundaries of that accepted narrative, whatever the consensus bias is. Climate change was another example of this for a long time. You notice they don't even talk about that one anymore. And so, having been in the military and then serving in places, Guantanamo Bay, for example, was a place that was completely lied about in the media, and I guarantee you, every single person in this room, with the probable exception of Tim Ballard, who just walked in, because that's a guy who knows the truth, you have a vision in your mind of, and a picture of these places that exist because the media painted it for you, or Hollywood painted it for you, or it was an accepted narrative, a constructed reality that was implanted in your mind. And what did we see most recently? Deanna Gabbard and Joe Kent was just here, so she was in the White House yesterday, and for the first time ever, we've seen someone actually totally shatter that veil from a position of power like she's done. This has never happened before in the history of the United States, where the Director of National Intelligence has come out and for the first time told the truth about what actually happened, that in this instance, Russiagate was a domestic intelligence operation that was run on the American people and their president in conjunction with the entire mainstream media. And that's something that, of course, the media is doing everything they can to silence because it's an indictment on their entire process.
Excellent. It's very hard for folks in the military, and the media to give up the microphone. I appreciate how you guys are passing it back and forth.
I didn't say that.
Congressman Crane, also, give him a round of applause. Served in the United States military, several combat deployments as a Navy SEAL. And speaking of deployments and speaking of the military, we know intel drives maneuver. You're set in a position right now with our government where you get to see things, you get to hear things. We are doing this pivot to China thing that's going to be happening here pretty soon. But while that's happening, what message do you have to the alternative media to not take their eyes off of any certain direction and be only focused on China? What else is happening out there that people need to make sure they don't forget about?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I realize many of my friends and allies in the room are, very focused on China, and they have very good reasons to do that. They are definitely a threat to the United States, and Jack and Laura can go into great detail on some of the reasons why. And I agree with them. They are a definite threat to the United States. But one thing that I will say to everybody in this room is, don't take your eyes off of radical Islamists. Okay. I've studied their theology, I've studied their eschatology, and I think they often get underrated for a few reasons. One of them is when we look at threats around the world, we often look at nation states, we look at their economies, we look at their resources, and we also look at their weaponry and their military capabilities, and that's an area where I think they often get overlooked because they don't rank high when it comes to a couple of those things. When you study their theology, and some of these young kids are being taught that if they are killed in the line of jihad, they'll go to heaven and get 70 virgins. That's really dangerous. And when you compare it to some of the other nation states that we often rank high on that list, they're not fighting for the same reasons. They're not fighting because they believe that, it's divine and that God will bless them, for fighting infidels and, toppling the West. So I think that it's important that we do not take our eyes off of radical Islam.
And when you look at that list, you're saying some don't rank as high as others. Where are we at on the top of that list that people should make sure they don't take their eye off? Which country, which group, which organization, which terror cell, where at?
Well, I think that if you look at it and you right now, another reason that they're often, I would say, underestimated is because they're spread out all over the place, right? If you look at the Middle East, there's a lot of infighting. But if you look at what they want to do and reestablish a caliphate, which I do believe in the future will happen, that's why I said radical Islam and jihadists, because I do believe at some point that they will be able to reunite, get past all other differences. I could make a biblical case for it as well, but this is one of the dangers I see, is that I think as we pivot, and again I understand the reasons why, but I think that there's going to be a focus taking off of radical Islam, and I think one of the other dangers to it is that the United States of America, because our military is so strong, our military is built to take on nation states, not necessarily fight insurgencies. And so I think it's one of the reasons that radical Marxism, communism, and socialism have been so effective and so destructive here in the United States, because this isn't what our Department of Defense is built to do, right? And that's one of the reasons I think that radical Islam, it will be such a big threat in the years to come.
Outstanding. Thank you.
Can I answer that?
Please answer it.
I want to put that in the context of the media. So I said the shift started in 2016. I should really have said that the shift became apparent in 2016. Because if you actually look at Congressman Crane is 100% correct. But if you look at the playbook of radical Islamists, first of all, it's identical to the Marxist playbook in many respects. Unrestricted warfare is unrestricted warfare, whether it's done by the Chinese or what we call radical Islamists. But radical Islam is a term that is in itself created to deceive. Because having studied the Quran, you will know that it's not actually radical to fight for the restoration of the Ummah, which is the Islamic people and the Sharia throughout the world. In fact, it's as mainstream as Islam gets to believe in that as the established. So it's not a radical idea. It might be groups that use radical tactics, but we're the ones who gave it that name, and that's where the role of the media comes in. And if you actually look at the term Islamophobia, you cannot date that term prior to the Obama administration. It didn't exist. It wasn't a concept. So this is why history for journalists matters. So what happens with the rise of independent media is you get a lot of people that can grab a microphone and can grow an audience. And if they make a deal with a social media company, they can get a big audience pretty quickly. They can come out of nowhere. I don't know, they can come out of the CIA like Sean Ryan. And they can be very popular very quickly. And they can stay there as long as somebody else decides to keep them there. But what is it they're not doing? What are they not? We are students. Journalists are students, not experts. Any journalist presented to you as an expert is already lying to you, because we're not experts. I can do a series for 5 years. I can cover nuclear energy, and I will never have the knowledge of a nuclear scientist who's truly an expert. So what we are supposed to be is students of history, students of culture, students of modern popular, governments and who are the players of the time. We literally are students of everything. But journalists have stopped being that. Number one, daily news and immediate deadlines are the death of that kind of level of knowledge and investigation, but they're necessary. So it's important for journalists really to be able to transition beyond those things, right? You can be a daily news journalist for a while and really get hard news skills, or work for a news agency and have that instant hard news nose. But what you're supposed to build over time is context and knowledge. And that is supposed to be merged with principles. But what we have as journalists who are not curious, the reason you don't know the stories that Jack's telling you about is because our media lies by omission. So it's not just what they print that's not true, it's what they don't tell you. You get slices of the truth, because the best propaganda is built on kernels of truth. When you make something up, it's very hard to keep it there, because what happens, it's a lie that has no legs and it keeps collapsing on itself. And you keep having to tell more lies, and as you do that, you create what? You create a trail of guilt, which is exactly where we are with Tulsi Gabbard today, right? With what she's revealing, because the lie of Russia collusion had to be constantly propped up, and now that's crumbling, and there's an evidence trail to that cover-up. But what we as journalists don't do is we're not curious about where does Islamophobia come from? Who created that term? Well, there's an organization called DC Leaks, which is like WikiLeaks. You can't find this on the internet anymore, even in the Wayback Machine. There are people who can find it, but they're beyond my reach. But what did they leak? The playbook, when the Open Society Foundations created the playbook for the creation of the term Islamophobia. Exactly how they would define it, how they would proliferate it, what they would do to people who didn't adhere to it. So they created this what? As a cover. Because after 9/11, Americans were focused on the threat of Islamic conquest, not the threat of the average Muslim person who, I'm not going to play that game. I'm not going to fall into that trap of information warfare that's created that if you talk about the Islamic conquest of our society, you're now prejudiced against the average Muslim person. It's nonsense. I've lived for many years, 5 years in Iraq, years in Afghanistan. Don't tell me about Islamophobia. I don't care about that. What I want to show you is that this is a made-up term that is a tool of control and intimidation. And it has operated as a cover while the Islamic conquest has moved not just across Africa, Nigeria, Congo, Ethiopia, across the Sahel, villages that we're now supposed to believe were always Muslim, where the Africans themselves are like, where the hell did this come from? This is not our history. We don't wear a bias here, but we're so uncurious as media about the origins of everything. We ignore it. and it's burned all its way across Europe, and it's right at our front door. It's in Canada, it's beyond that border. It's all over, and it's the same tactics, it's the same playbook, except that Islam is not a religion. We allow it to have the First Amendment protection because we don't know anything about Islam. And it's actually, I learned this from jihadis themselves at the Finsbury Mosque in London, which is one of the main command and control centers for the conquest of the UK and Europe. And those guys laughed at me when I said Islam is a religion. They said, it's not, it's a civilization. And when you understand that, you understand that two civilizations cannot coexist, especially one under which the implementation of Sharia is the only foundation for it to be legitimate in the eyes of Allah. So you cannot have the Constitution of the United States of America and Sharia law coexist. There's one law of the land. And if you don't uphold that, if you're intimidated into silence and manipulated by a compliant media that are both incurious and dishonest, profoundly dishonest, and then a weapon to punish people who speak up, that's what we allow our media to be. So if you still in this room are sitting here and you reference everything through the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, you're part of the problem.
Well, follow-up question for Laura, just real quick. Give her a round of applause. Excellent. You spoke about the time and how much time you have spent overseas in foreign countries, okay, the Middle East. How much time have you spent in the Middle East? And when we talk about media, what was the propaganda you saw that was for them against us, and how does it compare to some of the things you're seeing in the United States now?
I think, Boone, for me, it's more about understanding that the obligations that Islamic people feel they live under if they are faithful to the teachings. First of all, there's the teaching. There's what comes from Allah, what comes from God, but then there's what comes from the Prophet Muhammad and how he interpreted those things. So many of the things today that are completely against American culture and principles and ideas come from the interpretations from the Prophet Muhammad, which come from a man, which is, for example, they believe that every human being on earth has Islamic DNA, that we are born a Muslim, and we don't convert to Islam, we revert to our original, and that's why Christians are such an affront to Islam, because we turned away. Who are the people of the book? The Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims, right? So when ISIS rages across Mosul and ancient Mesopotamia, now northern Iraq, and they give Christians the opportunity to revert, right, and pay the jizya, but the Yazidis and the Kurds, they are enslaved, right? Because actually Muhammad believed that Jesus was a slave. In fact, was his slave. Jesus was his slave. And so it's understanding that ideology puts an obligation. So when I was with Afghan commanders during the war with the Taliban, and I lived alone on the front line as a woman, and at the time when the Taliban controlled 95% of the country, and there were many commanders that I would meet with regularly because I would go everywhere with Afghan soldiers. And every day they would beg me, can the United States please help us? Please. Begging, sometimes tears rolling down their cheeks. All the stories of torture. I mean, the people around me, they hadn't been able to go to Kabul to see their families for 8 years. 8 years. And so when Kabul finally fell, and by the way, it was not an American invasion. America provided the planes and the intelligence and the support from clandestine warriors and special operations, but the Afghans did the fighting, and they don't consider it an invasion. Why does that matter? Because the media still talks about the invasion of Afghanistan, even though it's not actually accurate. But when it finally happened and the U.S. had helped the Afghans defeat their enemies, I said, America's already talking about war in Iraq and going against Saddam Hussein. Now that they've helped you, and I'm standing in front of a container where these Taliban had kept these guys prisoner, and we'd liberated the container, and these people were emaciated and dying. There were tears. I mean, they were reunited with their brethren. They were saved. This was a very emotional moment, and from the bottom of their heart, they're thanking America. So I said, okay, well, would you consider going to help America? Since America helped you defeat your enemy, can you help America defeat its enemy in Iraq? And I knew the answer, but I wanted it on camera. They said, no, we can't do that. I said, but why not? They said, well, because Saddam is Muslim. Mm-hmm. So, and under the Quran, you cannot, as a Muslim, assist a non-Muslim in defeating someone who is one of your own. So it's not, you know, if you really want to talk, the serious propaganda is the propaganda that teaches that Jewish people are worthless, that they're not human. That's the real propaganda.
It reminds me of Iraq. When we go into Iraq, Muqtada al-Sadr, he becomes proliferated as this cleric, and Saddam killed Muqtada's father. We capture Saddam, he gets hung, and Muqtada hates us. We just avenged your father, and you still hate us.
Yeah, but he's a product of Iran.
Absolutely so.
And we did what Iran wanted. We got rid of the enemy that they couldn't get rid of themselves. They lost 1 million people from 1980 to 88.
Oh, this conversation could go on a long time, but we got to keep going. Over to Jack. Give her a round of applause. If you ever get that chance. And watch Going Rogue with Laura Logan. It's a great show. You get a lot more of this kind of stuff and just very, very exquisite. Jack, General Flynn always talks about digital soldiers. Digital soldiers. A lot of that is your audience. What is the next leg? What is the next thing that these digital soldiers, where should they be looking to turn? What should they be looking to do in this future where legacy media is dying out, digital soldiers, alternative media is rising? What does the future look like for our digital soldiers?
That's a great question, and thanks so much to Laura for your testimony just there. But the issue with anyone who's involved in the online freedom movement, the online patriot movement, and this goes for anywhere in the world, is not just the United States, but anywhere in the West where they're fighting this. Obviously in the EU, there's so many issues with censorship there. So censorship has, by and large, failed due to the success of Donald Trump and the ability to move quicker with our systems and our distribution networks than ever. And a huge shout out, of course, to Elon Musk, because him purchasing X when he did with $44 billion of his own money provided that platform for truth to be able to be received. And I remember always saying, even having been a formerly, anonymous user, anon of Twitter myself, that we've never asked for any special favors. We just want a level playing field where then as he's digging under the hood of how Twitter was set up before, in the code, you would find that certain keywords and certain key phrases would get you downlisted, would get you shadow banned, which was completely real. That's another one of those conspiracy theories we were told about, or one of those things we were told was a conspiracy theory that became true. And if you accumulated too many of these words or the volume of the words in a certain period of time, well then your tweets, your posts would not be seen by anyone. So they wouldn't take you down. You wouldn't even know that you were screaming into the void, but they would have done that to you. So they realize that hasn't worked because Elon has stripped that off, and I applaud him for it. I absolutely do. So the next threat is this. We are going to run into a threat of over-information. What do I mean by over-information? I mean, if you can't censor information, then what's the best way to combat that? Malinformation, fake information, and the large majority of this is going to come about because of AI. So you will see AI generated, and I see it all day, I see it every single day, where there are not only AI generated posts and comments and sentiments, but entire AI generated bot networks, where the old bot networks that used to be paid by the likes of Media Matters and David Brock and American Bridge and all these different organizations, they used to be very clumsy and very...
Digital soldiers out there because they're part of this army that we have put together, and they're out there influencing them. They're saying, hey, you got to pay attention to what's going on. So we're gonna break for lunch, but before we do that, let's talk about this national security strategy, because Lara said it, and it has to do with the media, and it has to do with the connection, because I've written a book on radical Islamism or whatever, and I've studied communism. I've studied my life in certainly in the military has always been about our enemies. I have had to study our enemies because that's my role when I go to present what we are going to face to a friendly unit that I've been assigned to, whether it's special operations or whether it's airborne forces or all the way up to the Army and certainly to the major force level.
and had to argue all of these different things, because they would say, well, how do you know that? And I'd say, because I've studied this, I've examined them, I've, in some cases, gotten to know these people, and I think about, I put my mind into their mind, I put my feet into their boots, and it's very, very important. So this is really key, because we actually said this in here, and Larry used the terms like slicing up. They slice up the information, right? So we actually captured that, and Boone is the one that kind of brought this to my attention. And it's actually, it's on page, if you got it, it's on page 8, and actually we have a picture. We have a picture in there, and you're probably not going to get it, but it's, yeah, you have a picture in there of somebody slicing up a salami, right? And this is actually a Marxist. This is in the late 40s, I guess, maybe, if I get the dates right. And the guy's name is Matthias Rakoczy. He was a Hungarian in the late 40s. He basically used the phrase salami slicing. So this is how they do it in societies. This is how they do it in the media. This is a tactic that is very strategic when it's applied appropriately. We've been going through it for a couple of decades here in the United States of America. And because we love to argue inside the family, which is what we're doing here in the American family right now, we are having a massive argument right here in the United States of America with each other. And we can do it. We have talked about China and Russia a lot, and I don't know if they're, look around real quick, but, we invited them. They were here last night, and they'll be in here probably today. Maybe they're here somewhere, but to speak, too. I want to hear everybody. I want to hear the counter. I want to hear this is what. But see, there are places, and it's tough. It's like we're gonna have a break here for lunch, and then we're gonna come back because I want to have some of these African nations get up here and talk about Africa, because this idea of salami slicing is a big deal. And Africa, in my studies of Africa, the continent, and the various countries. And we'll talk about it when we come back from lunch. That's actually the center and the hub of, scientifically, of human history. Okay, it's like if you look at the way the world evolved to where we are today. That's you can go back and there's great books on it. And so I wanted to bring Africa in, and we'll take a break for lunch, but then we're going to come back. I wanted to bring Africa in because the amount of resources, one is a continent, two, it is a beautiful set of cultures, but it's under assault in its own way, right? I mean, I've studied sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa, middle of Africa, west, east, the various gulfs around the beautiful continent, and so we're going to hear a little bit about that. But this business of salami slicing, which is how to slice up a society, is how the media has sliced up our way of thinking and how we think. Okay, and it comes from somebody who was part of the Marxist revolution during the early part of the last century, and so it's not just some made-up stuff. This is really deeply thought about stuff. It's written about. They have studied it, and they have studied their foes to try to figure out ways to overcome our strengths. And so anyway, I just want to leave it on that note for now. We're going to take about, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes. Okay, 45 minutes. So what time do we come back? 1:30. Okay, so back here at 13:30, please. We have lunch for you out there. Take a break, and we'll see you back here at 13:30 for an Africa group. Go ahead.
Thank you, everybody.
I shut it off.
Oh, okay. How's it going, sir?
Good. Good. Excellent. Okay, here, I'll leave this here.
Keep it like that because the way she's cutting, the reason I changed it is because the way they're doing the editing.
Yeah, they're putting it on the
They're putting everybody to the side, and so putting in the middle, they'd be going back and forth. It doesn't make any sense.